Well, really good to see you all again. And what a fabulous day we had yesterday. My goodness. I think we've got a few, morning after the day before, and other people will be joining us later, but we'll make a start. And we're going to start by, I'm going to welcome my fantastic head of design, Shelley McNulty, who's going to welcome us all today for the conference. So over to you, Shelley.
Thanks, Alice. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Manchester. I'm glad you've got the good end of the weather this week. I believe there's a storm incoming later. But it's wonderful to have you here in Manchester. As Alice said, my name is Shelley McNulty. I'm the head of design here. As you will know, the art school and design in particular has a really strong heritage of textiles. In fact, the design school was conceived in 1838 as a response from the industrialists of the time, the textile trade at the time, who wanted to grow designers here in the city rather than going to India and Paris for their designers. And so what we really love now, in this contemporary context, is that's gone full circle, and we collaborate, with our colleagues globally all the time. We also really value, our partners, such as the British Textile Biennale, and we really appreciate that you want to work with us. In fact, we have another conference happening this afternoon, which is the European League of Institutes of Art, and we're debating big themes around, what is it to be a creative in these global times of global challenge. And a lot of the themes that you're discussing at Textile and Place are being brought forward into this next conference. So it's a busy week for us here in Manchester, but we're so grateful that you've made the time to come and spend with us, and I really wish you a great last day of your conference.
Very much, Bye. Thank you very much, Shelley. So again, welcome to all our speakers, chairs, colleagues, students. I want to say a happy birthday yesterday for Elaine. We didn't wish her birthday greetings yesterday, but today. And, here we are to kind of follow on from yesterday. What generosity and powerful contributions. We had a brilliant evening with Petrakucha presentations. Thank you to all of you for the depth of your knowledge and the preparation that you'd made. I learnt a lot, and the range of extraordinary presentations was, it was a really lovely evening. So yesterday, I kind of wrote a few notes just to summarize, although we had that fantastic kind of pulling together by Jeff. We heard about the rhythm, slowness, attentiveness, where cloth expresses the external and the internal landscape of culture and race. It suggests another world is possible. Christine talked about sauntering, santerre, which I was fascinated by, where we lose ground, we are without home, which disrupts and fractures us from this attentiveness to production and the ingenuity, I kind of played with that word a bit, of cloth. We learnt how rhythm and repetition promotes the revalorization of practices and attachment to place. We heard this is not as a tradition that is fixed, but as an evolution of accumulated experience, of loss and gain, of reinvention, of fabulation of meaning. The mnemonic of time, looping back and forward, progressive and cyclical, is generative, even disruptive, but allows a possible, though not certain, regenerative process of reinvention. Cloth was described as a possible site for the reclamation of identity, a fabric that weaves and holds multiple authorial strands of syntax, of symbolism, ornament, of connections to place, of movement, through migration and reconceptualization through technologies and the imagination. We heard how cloth was described not even as a form that is fixed, with and without edges, mutable, changing, constructing new landscapes and relationships, textures and temporalities. So I'm now going to ask Lucy, who's one of our students. Where are you, Lucy? Because we've got our students summarising, writing notes, and you were going to just kind of echo back some of the notes that Jeff, the question that you gave Jeff.
Thank you, Alice. Hi, everyone. So when Geoffrey gave his closing remarks yesterday, he reflected that craft is always rooted in its past, even when it is looking clearly to the future. People who knit, weave, or embroider are in various ways in dialogue with the past of their discipline. And when asked by us textiles students, is looking to the future of textiles and design just as important as reflecting on the past in context of regeneration? Geoffrey said, "I think this is the right question to be asking. It's important not to see them as alternatives."
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lucy. You know, we've tasked our students to take notes and summarise the sessions. Many of them are embarking on their level 6 dissertations. So, you know, they're really important as part of this process of the conference. I told you yesterday that this is the third Textile in Place conference. And we're looking back and learning from the 2 previous ones. One was, and we're here in person, but we've kind of learnt, you know, from the previous one, which was online. So we've got, as we saw yesterday, we've got some aspects that are online, but we're not peer-reviewed this time. We wanted to have, you know, the inclusion of students, and we wanted a kind of much more conversational, relaxed approach. And I think that really was evidenced yesterday, where we found that just opening up conversations in a much more informal way allowed some quite kind of rigorous discussions. So I also wanted to remind you that as a consequence of the last conference 2 years ago, we have the special issue of the Journal of Textile, Cloth and Culture, which is being produced next year, 2024, but some of those contributions are online already, and we're really proud of that. That's been, Gemma and I have been involved in curating that. You know, Gemma in particular, I have to admit, as Gemma is, you know, a very valuable support. So, the programme has been put together actually by Gemma and many of my textile colleagues. So thank you all for that. I feel as though I am really well supported, and we wanted to sort of celebrate the richness and diversity of voices that we here represent in textiles, but include our conversations with those, our partners and beyond. As you see, the art school is quite busy, and we have got this conference following on from us, and we are making those notes to take forward because we want to influence leaders. We want to introduce them to a textile lens. The making activities continue. They've moved down. Jackie is down on the ground floor, and then we have another activity by our colleague Eleanor Mulhern, who will be making, and there'll be a poet there as well. So please go down at lunchtime. We need to hustle down, I'm afraid, so that we clear the space. But we reconvene there and hold your conversations there and access those making activities. And then we've also got the Growing House exhibition on the ground floor. And yesterday I introduced you to that, but I'll do it again. Kate Egan, my colleague, has curated this exhibition in collaboration with Professor Azador Makarov from the China Arts Academy and the artist Xian Zhu, and it's supported by the British Council. And then we have a second exhibition by Dr. Lee Kai-hung, the Cultural Bursary exhibition titled Exchange, and it's on display on the 3rd floor of the East Grosvenor exhibition. So again, our students will take you there. So I just wanted to, don't know, have I got time to read you a review? Am I all right for time, Gemma? I read this review of Ella Natsui's exhibition in The Guardian. Some of you may have seen it. And I just thought, actually, I need to read you this review. It's extraordinary. So it's just been installed. Many of you will be familiar with Ella Natsui's work, and it's called Behind the Red Moon. So I was going to edit it, and then I thought, I'll just read you the whole thing. But you cut me off if I'm going on too long. From a distance, it looks ugly and apocalyptic, like a burned-out curtain, but approach the biggest of the three hangings dropping from the heights of Tate Modern's Turbine Hall, and a miracle begins. What seemed to be dingy and melancholy becomes radiant and weightless, holding and treasuring light from above before releasing it as starshine. Your eyes are kissed by the onrush of colours, gold, bronze, black, all emerging from a complex dance of squares and rectangles that float in the air like spangles of glowing dust. Ella Natsui, the Nigeria-based Ghanaian giant of contemporary art, has created a redemptive masterpiece. This colossal space always had the capacity to be a modern cathedral, but few artists commissioned to work here have dared to treat it in such a romantic, ecstatic way. Ella Natsui does. His translucent, mystical hangings finally give this grey void the stained glass windows it needs. Seizing beauty from despair, hope from dereliction is the theme of Ella Natsui's art, and the closer you get, the more intensely paradoxical it is. As you walk in, you are greeted by a red and gold canopy overhead like a tent in the desert. Beyond, there is a ragged metallic hanging that reminded me of a mobile. Ella Natsui started making art as a reclamation of the industrial world's detritus in the 1970s, and this has added urgency with every new degree of climate crisis. Yet he is a poet, not a protester, which I kind of thought that's so interesting when we think about what Christine was saying. And his found stuff suggests not just literal rubbish, but human waste. People as well as bottle tops are gathered up in his ark. The transformation you witness in these works is not just a neat academic idea. It's a baffling alchemical transmutation. It seems to happen right before your eyes. The imagination sees waves, troughs, an ocean of colour, even as you rationally recognise all the little bits of salvaged scrap. It is impossible to quite believe these lovely images come from what usually ends up in waste piles at the edge of cities or barges heading to poisoned islands. But nevertheless, it is true. The knowledge keeps Anatsui's art on this earth and gives it rare depth. It's heartbreakingly poised between desolation and hope. He reflects the peril of our world where people are treated like waste. Anatsui engages with poetic possibilities of his materials. Each material has its properties, physical and even spiritual, he explains. Behind the Red Moon explores elemental forces interwoven with human histories of power, oppression, dispersion, and survival. Don't you think that's amazing? And actually it kind of echoes so much of what we were talking about yesterday. So go and see it if you can. So it now gives me huge pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, who's going to sort of set the theme of today, which is around collaboration and how we extend those threads between ourselves, using that metaphor again, and how we work within communities and find connections with societies. So we've really approached this today as collaborative conversations and how we disperse that activity amongst each other and ourselves. So I'm really delighted to invite our keynote speaker, Amne Sheikh Faruqi. So I first met Amne at the Making Futures Festival in Plymouth, where she was part of a panel which was on crafters' leadership. And then I met Amne again when I was in Karachi with the British Council. And we've continued to keep in touch with each other, and she's doing remarkable work. So it is a real pleasure that she's here. She's a development practitioner, livelihoods and value chain specialist with deep interests in arts and culture-based solutions to disenfranchisement. Amne leverages power of indigenous, so again, you see we're coming back to some of those themes, heritage, narrative making as a tool for social change. And I think we'll hear that again quite a lot through the day. She's been affiliated with the non-for-profit sector in Pakistan for 18 years, with experience in gender mainstreaming, economic empowerment, and environmental initiatives. Her body of work lies at the intersection of social justice, gender equality, sustainability, decolonisation, and fashion. She's the lead curator of the Women of the World Festivals in Pakistan. She's been doing that since 2016, and I saw her. We met, didn't we, Amne, at the festival hall in London, the one this year, and she's about to go off to Brazil as curator after the conference to participate in that, lead something there. She's founder and CEO of Polly and Other Stories, an artisan first marketplace for craft and creative makers in Pakistan. Amni is also an Acumen and Miller Centre Social Enterprise Fellow. It is with a great honour that you've come to speak to us today, Amne. Welcome. Sorry. Oh, okay, cool.
Hello, everybody, and I want to start by obviously thanking Alice first for the most generous introduction, which I will now strive to live up to. As Alice said, we met some years ago. It was actually my first time in the UK when I met Alice at Plymouth, and I have to say that the gentle, kind way she received me then and the leadership that she's shown is reflected in some of the conversation that I hope to have with you today. So thank you to Alice and, of course, to Gemma for putting up with the 1,000,001 questions that I had. It's a huge honor to share the stage with some of the incredible speakers who spoke here today. I can tell you I had a very anxious night. I was like, oh, gosh, maybe I should have gone first and it would have been done. But today I'm going to be speaking to you about a very particular kind of craft as it is made and imagined by Afghan refugee. Oh, I was worried it's moving on its own. It's not. Okay. Afghan refugee women in Pakistan and what this means for fostering inclusive futures and for the creation of leadership among them. Before I begin, I do want to acknowledge something which sometimes sits heavy in my heart when I present this kind of work. And it is that I do acknowledge the complex and contradictory ways in which women's handicraft is produced in the Global South. The concept of traditional and authenticity masked by the alienation and sometimes almost isolation caused by the commodification and commercialization of craft for market is dependent on some very patriarchal constructions of home-based labor and hand-powered. Something which women may conceive as a leisure activity becomes a job. And then sometimes... I will not touch that again. I worry a little bit about shoring up elite ideas within our own space about tradition, about heritage, and about women's roles in them. I worry about reducing their labor to use-value production, which may further marginalize them. And the reason I wanted to kind of lead with that is that I think sometimes conversations like these, it's hard to get into it when I'm talking about what I do, but I do recognize that these are the dichotomies within which we do our work. So I think we'll all agree. I'll read that if that's okay. It's one of my favorite poems, and I never thought when I made this presentation that I would be speaking these lines at the time in the world that it is. Once we had a country and we thought it fair. Look in the atlas and you will find it there. We cannot go there now, my dear. We cannot go there now. So as I said, it's a particularly difficult time to be speaking about refugees and the wars and violence and loss that creates them. Ordinary people like you and I have lost everything, and some of them were brave enough to start over in alien contexts. So this poem was written in 1939, and obviously it was written in the context of World War II and the suffering of Jews by Nazis, the persecution, the concentration camps, and everything that involved the suffering that accompanied. It's a painful reminder, of course, of how little we have learned from history, and it is in fact, the painful events of the past that are often used to justify another apartheid, a cruel death camp that is on our screens, in our heads, and I hope in our hearts. I digress, I know, because this was not the original plan, but I wanted to start by acknowledging that pain is at the core of the refugee experience, whether it's Afghan, Jew, or otherwise. And I think Auden did a remarkable job of expressing that. Okay, we're not friends anymore. Sorry. There's a lot of slides. I'm so sorry, Gemma. Okay. So Pakistan is next door to Afghanistan. We share a border and a lot of cultural traits and practices and norms with them. Pakistan has been taking in refugees from Afghanistan longer than I've been alive. Many escaped the Taliban, not once, but many times, and the brutality that the regime has meant for ordinary people. Others ran from war. Most of them live in extreme poverty. I also speak in a difficult context, again, not imagined when I originally made this presentation, but it just tells you how real world all these issues are. On the 4th of October, the Pakistani government made an announcement giving unregistered Afghan refugees 28 days to leave the country or to be arrested and expelled. I understand that as of this week, 2,600 have already been sent across the border against their will. Mass deportation, of course, it's seen as a direct response to growing hostility between our governments. The Taliban regime in Pakistan aren't getting along at this time, and the government in Pakistan blames refugees for the resurgence of terrorist attacks in Pakistan. So these are some numbers. It's interesting to note that the government of Pakistan number is a little different from the UNHCR number, but I hope it gives you an idea of the sheer number of people we're talking about. It's about 4 million people who are in Pakistan, and they have different kinds of statuses. So the sort of aspirational status is that you have a POR, which is a proof of registration card. So back in 2016, which is the last time that voluntary repatriation happened, a lot of people, even with PORs, were targeted. So it's a complex relationship between the states, between the people and state, and between refugees and state. So Afghanistan right now is at the brink, as we know, of economic and humanitarian crisis, especially post the recent earthquakes, where half the population of around 28 million people is highly food insecure. I was reading something about the earthquake, which really broke my heart, but 90% of the people who died were women and children. So, as I said, registration in Pakistan is a complex and contested issue. So some people have a POR, some people have an Afghan citizenship card, but thousands are undocumented. Particularly this new wave of the numbers, again, are never exact. They're between 600 to 700,000 new arrivals since 2021. All of them are unregistered. I'm not suggesting that Pakistan is having an easy time of it. Post-COVID economic sort of crisis has been extreme, followed by the devastating floods of last year, where 1/3 of the country and 35 million was underwater and 35 million people were displaced. 40% increase in commodity prices just this quarter. There are IMF-forced government austerity measures, including the removal of subsidies on essential goods and the rise in taxes. Prior to COVID, Pakistan's poverty rate, or people living under the poverty line, was estimated at around 23%. It is currently at 39%. So the challenges are many, and within this context, of course, when you look at Afghans and then you look at Afghan refugee women, you're looking at a marginalized group at the margin. They're misunderstood, undermapped, segregated. Many of them operate, well, from homes, and therefore are relegated to what is called the informal economy. But this informal nature is not a choice for many of them. There's a great deal of apathy, a lack of data, and all of it is linked to ideas about the patriarchy, women's role within it, religion, community, and of course, gender. The situation in Pakistan, as I said, is made worse by our own spiraling crises and, of course, pre-election discourse. I'm certain people in the UK are familiar with that. And added to that, a worsening security situation and cross-border conflict. I'm going to move away now from the context, but I felt it was important to set it as we begin to talk about the women. So within the context of craft, the framing of creativity often comes from a Western lens in Pakistan as well, and it doesn't account for cultural differences or for socio-economic conditions in which craft is produced. The artisan economy in Pakistan, within what we call the cultural economy, where culture of a particular community carries immense value. So tangible elements of this, like labor or product, are of course well understood, including in Pakistan. But intangibles like creativity, intellectual property, and generational knowledge are way more contested. In refugee groups, these are also very fiercely guarded as a facet of their identity and often the only thing that they have left that they can call their own. Creativity is deeply interwoven within social norms and practices and seen as a way of being. It is also seen as a group asset versus an individual offering. There are, of course, leaders, and product knowledge is with the masters, as we call them, but these women, or these sort of leaders within these communities, are seen as custodians of best practices and co-creators, rather than as somebody to look up to with deep respect. They're connected to each other very deeply. So creation, as I said, is linked to identity and kinship, and the language around it is not copied from the West. So if creativity is a skill, and artisans and traditional skills struggle in the modern economy, it is because they're not intrinsically valued anymore in the mainstream market, but they are still valued very much at the societal level within these communities. So, of course, I think many of us recognize this, but within traditional communities, this is still a very contested notion. Many market solutions in the Global South do not recognize now, because we're trying to emulate Western cycles. I mean, the most aspirational thing that can happen. When I was coming to the UK, one of the questions I was asked was, are you taking anything to sell? Because you're seen as the ultimate market and the best buyer and the ultimate consumer. And validation from a foreign market is the highest aspiration for somebody working in the craft space. Of course, I reject that very deeply, because I don't think that if we don't value something locally, we can expect it to be valued at an international level. But the point I'm making, that many existing market solutions do not recognize that production cycles within traditional artisan communities are unique. They are seasonal, they are part-time, they're highly decentralized, they are women-led, they're creativity-based, and they're not like any factory assembly line models in the world. And they're also contextualized for particular seasons, for particular communities, and for particular times of the year. So they're not static, they're mutable, and they keep changing as per the need of the community. So supporting craft business or small business is, of course, an important means of empowerment in the Global South, and it's no different for Afghan refugee communities. Because inclusiveness, while also preserving age-old heritage skills, is both a social and cultural opportunity. So women who are segregated from the mainstream due to socio-cultural norms that dictate parda, which means they do not leave their homes, have little opportunity to access income, no access to credit. They're isolated by poverty, illiteracy, and oppressive socio-cultural norms. There's a term we use in Pakistan, I don't think it's used as commonly in the West, it's this idea of being homebound. And so even our law talks about homebound workers or homebound women. And there's 20 million of them in the country, and most Afghan refugees are not in that number, of course, because they're not counted as part of our population, are homebound. That means that when we work with Afghan refugees to create hope in a context where they have no reproductive rights and leading to long cycles of childbearing and domestic violence, craft can sometimes be their only opportunity. So the right to safe space, to express, to create, to thrive, doing what they like, offers purpose and brings value beyond the monetary compensation, which of course is the central piece of the puzzle. Dignified futures for creative and craft workers and communities is very critical in our context, given how many people depend on craft for livelihood. I feel that it falls on us, therefore, to demand better, more sustainable, and economically prosperous lives for the communities that cannot advocate for themselves. But creative businesses struggle to connect to market and to earn a decent living, which means that makers often just manage to subsist and feed themselves. It's always bothered me a great deal that in a country like mine, with its rich cultural history, which it takes great pride in, Uthra mentioned yesterday a 5,000-year-old fabric that was found 4 hours away from where I live in Mohenjo-daro. It was dyed with indigo in watts, which you can still see today. So we were clearly, at some point in our history, leaders in this space. But now, even though 15% of our 242 million people, and then if you add on the refugee communities, earn and live based on this craft, we are unable to value those people. So the people who create the physical manifestation of that which we call culture are not able to afford to send their kids to school. So it's a hard time to be working, as I said, on artisan rights, particularly in the context of cultural and intellectual property, because cheap mass production is on the rise. I heard somebody talking about the influence of China. I should say we share a border there too. So it's fueled by an industry-led development agenda, shrinking incomes, urbanization, poor investment in rural and refugee communities, which are now fragmented both by distance and changes in lifestyle. So in this context, to propagate and try to scale maker ecologies and explore means of changing crafts and industries such that small, local production can sustain communities is a challenge. We have been looking at digital solutions because they're often touted, and it was fascinating for me to see how digital is seen in the West versus how digital is seen in our context. When I say digital, I mean, can women have a smartphone? Could they access the internet? So it's simple things like this which are still something desirable, still something that we're working towards. So textiles, of course, form the critical link to the outside world for women because this is how they communicate. It's an access to market. And, we heard a lot yesterday about the power of crafting as meditation, as community, as self-actualization. But for most women, especially refugee women, it also creates a critical pool of support. I've seen women come together to craft, but console each other, and band together to support each other through birth and death and violence and grief. And I've seen women claim space and find their voice and find joy and pass the baton to each other on leadership. I will negotiate, and then you can cook, and she can look after the children, and I'll make my husband speak to yours, and it's okay. Here, I'm tired. It's your turn now. And that's how leadership is often practiced in these spaces. So a lot of the work that we do with refugee women involves connecting the worlds of, art, policy, business, and markets towards a common purpose. These women, as I said, operate in a highly informal economy where concepts like minimum wage or a fair wage are laughable concepts and suggestions. But when capacity is created and attention is given, their stories can be told and showcased. And their process, both ancient and modern, is valued when there is power in the group. I also want to take a minute here to talk about something which I don't think we talk about enough, particularly from the women's lens, and that's friendship between women. So especially in the refugee context, but equally in other rural and marginalized contexts in Pakistan, when we create spaces that women can use for themselves, often it's it's created with an economic purpose in mind. And I feel like the economic message can be one of the easiest ones for communities to digest because it doesn't challenge any deeply held or valued norms. You're saying, here's an opportunity to feed your children, and we're going to do it in a culturally sensitive way. But often these friendships, which are created across boundaries of class and race, because of course, when Afghan refugees live in Pakistan, they don't always live in camps anymore. They've been around for over 45 years. So they're integrated into neighborhoods and communities, which means they work with what I think the UNHCR calls host artisans. So host and refugee work together, and there's intergenerational exchange across different craft practices. And this is the bedrock, I feel, to changing the worldview. I know I am not the same person I was who went to Sorabgo to meet these women for the first time in 2017. So I can testify that it is a powerful tool for change. And maybe I can spend a minute talking a little bit about the community and where they are and where they work. So growing up in Karachi, this community is kind of on the outskirts of the city because it started off as a camp, of course, which then became an informal or what we call Kachi Abadi, or a slum. And that slum then became a little more formalized, so now it's a poor community. It was one of the most violent communities, divided across ethnic and political lines. Even today, when you go and work with the women there are bullet marks all over the buildings, and they can talk about loss of family members. It's still a place that is very ripe for all of it to implode, but the last few years have been relatively peaceful. So when I was first going to work there, and I'm a Pakistani who grew up in Pakistan and I've lived there, so it's not like I was coming to an alien context, it was my own city, my family was reluctant for me to go. And they were like, no, you can't go, it's dangerous. And I remember that the compromise I had to make was that, fine, I won't go in a vehicle. So the fear was I'd be followed back, right? That was the big fear. So I was like, okay, I'm never going to go in the same car. So now we have this absolutely insane way of getting to the community, which is I'll go in my own car, get dropped off at a public space like a mall or something like that. From there, I'll hail we don't have Ubers, but we have something called Careem, which is basically an Uber. And I'll get on a Careem, and then that Careem will still not take me to that, but I'll get somewhere close to another market there. From there, I'll get on a tuk-tuk or a rickshaw, as we call them, and then I'll get to the community. So if you were trying to follow me there or back, you'd really have to be committed to the enterprise. It's kind of pointless. So after so many years of working in that space, I've realized that so much of what controls, particularly women, is fear of the other. And I think in Pakistan, as somebody from the middle class, the educated middle class with a great deal of privilege, I think we're often taught to fear across class groups. The man I'm meant to fear is not my social equal. The man I'm meant to fear is somebody who's poor. And I find that those men are not really that interested in me at all. So I just think that's just a side comment about kind of where this work is happening. But coming back to friendship, these friendships act as proxy to support systems missing due to the sort of prevalent Afghan culture, which they value and reinforce deeply, and of course the patriarchy. So women teach each other without sometimes even using words. There's no curriculum, there's no clear objectives, nothing is being measured. But they teach each other that it's okay to want more, it's okay to broaden your personal potentials. And friendships allow us to make mistakes, to question the status quo, and it can be life-altering. It has been for me, and it has been for the women I've had the privilege to work with. So again, I know when I was using this word collaboration, I was a little worried because I feel like there's a reductive lens applied to women's leadership around this idea of women being collaborative and friendly and so sweet, and men being, of course, competitive and aggressive. Now, I'm not going to challenge the latter, but I will say something about the former, which is that I think women's trajectory in the space of leadership, and definitely within refugee communities, is not linear. It's a tapestry which changes according to situations, according to the challenges, and according to the milestone. But what I feel is that women know that when they band together, they instinctively know this, that when they band together and then they have a shared vision, and sometimes that vision is just survival and feeding their children, getting access to healthcare. It doesn't have to be a grand, big vision to change the world in a way that we understand change. But these women know that they are stronger, and most importantly, that they are protected when they are together. So I wanted to bring you to one of the works that we ended up doing with a brand that you would all know called Chloe. So Chloe wanted to work with Afghan refugees, and this idea that in a mass-produced world, true luxury is of course handcrafted, it's indigenous, and it's heritage, and it brings voice and recognition and self-sufficiency to disadvantaged groups. So there was a collaboration between Made 51, which is a brand that UNHCR works under, and it's one of our partners got a large order to do these bags for Chloe. As you can imagine, this was for the 2022 spring-summer collection, super exciting for everybody in Pakistan. The refugee women have, of course, never heard of Chloe. Honestly, many people in Pakistan had not. Half the people on my team had no idea why this was exciting until they went on the website and saw the price tag. And then everybody was very excited. But the refugee women made components which were very, very culturally specific and incorporated into the products, including the iconic Mani and Woody handbags. I have to admit, I had to look that up, what is iconic about these bags. But it was a specific kind of embroidery called tar shumar. Tar means thread, and shumar means counting. But it's interesting because we were working with the Farsi Go, or the Persian-speaking ethnic group within the Afghan refugee groups. And shumar is also a word used in Urdu. So Urdu is what we call a tribal language, which means it's an amalgamation of all the people who came through the subcontinent. And shumar means to include, and I think that's really beautiful. It's not a narrative that Chloe picked up on, but I just thought I'd share that with you. So tar shumar and is the particular kind of embroidery used on this back, and it's obviously got a huge and long history of intricate craftsmanship, and the different types of thread work and needlework are very specific to a particular geography, as I said, the Hazara community within the space. Each strap took around 2 to 3 weeks to make by an individual woman. What was fascinating, as I said, this order was placed with one of the Made 51 partners in Pakistan, which is probably the oldest one. They've been working with refugees since they came to Pakistan in the late 70s. But in Karachi, so that even within Pakistan, there isn't one context in which refugee women exist. So in Karachi, which is obviously the largest city, where 40 million people, just saying, a very, very large city. It's very metropolitan, very modern, very cosmopolitan. So Afghan refugees within Karachi, even though they're at the margins and they're isolated, some of them are still in camps, have still had a degree of loss of skills that is less prevalent in the more remote or traditional parts of the country. So because it was a cross-country project where we were doing a small part, in Karachi we were also confronted, and I think the women were confronted with this idea of loss because they had lost the skills. So only the older women knew tar shumar. And also in places like Karachi, the ethnic groups are mixed. They're not always segregated by ethnicity. In other parts of the country, like Peshawar, for example, or Quetta, which are very close to the Afghan borders, they have managed to retain greater ethnic unity, I suppose you could say. And this I love about the story is the women from Karachi wanted more money for the same amount of work. So everybody I worked with was demanding twice what other cities were asking for. And that became a really hard thing to explain to Chloe, that why? And I was like, because they know what, and because they can get online, so they can see what you're going to charge for this bag, and they certainly want a piece of that. So I think that was kind of really interesting. I believe that brown one is the Mani, but please correct me if I'm wrong. But anyway, so this company obviously did showcase that you can act in solidarity with refugees in a tangible and impactful way. We looked at what women used the money for, and of course, and it's sad, but they used it for some really basic needs. It was all healthcare, food, education for children. So even something which feels like a coup, I mean, how often is Chloe going to come to Pakistan and work with Afghan refugees, is really only helping people subsist. Okay. So I believe, I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity, but as part of the work that we were doing, we ended up creating these artworks, which thank you so much for letting me carry these and bring them here. I'm really excited to be able to show these because I feel like that is the mark these women make on the world. Many of them will never leave their homes. Many of them will not interact with people outside, but this is them showing the world what they can do. So these artworks were based on a series of stories attesting agency, identity, and representation from the perspective of the refugee women and girls. They were developed accidentally, to be honest, as part of a pilot economic activity that we were doing with UNHCR. UNHCR had wanted us to go in and train women on skills they felt would be marketable. So there were some textile skills. As I said, there's been a great deal of loss among the younger girls. And we also wanted to make candles because we saw people like candles, so maybe they can make candles. That was a little bit more challenging because it wasn't seen as cultural, but there was definitely a large market opportunity. And in the process of working with these women, and this is why I love food, it's the perfect way to exchange and get to know somebody, is that we would often be in the field all day and we'd share a meal. And the women would like to bring something. So we had this exchange system where we would all bring things from our culture, so we all obviously represented different ethnic groups, and then we'd feed everybody. And then one day they wanted to thank us by bringing their food. So there was a lot of food exchange, and they had specific demands about what they wanted us to bring. And it was a fun exchange. And within these, we'll come a little bit later to the artwork, and I'll talk about it, the one that inspired the rest. There was a lot of storytelling and exchange and laughter, as you can imagine. And I started noticing that these women had so much to say, which was not even captured by projects like the coup that was Chloe. And I thought, well, what if they could tell their story in the medium they know best? Because many of them have no other literacy. So this project actually started just as the UNHCR funding was ending. I didn't have a big vision for it. Neither did the women. We were just having fun, to be honest. We were just drawing and illustrating, and then they became bigger, and then somehow these pieces emerged. But I love these artworks because they unmasked the lived experiences of a generation that continues to deal with the legacy of conflict and deprivation. And it shows the capacity of traditional handworks to connect people to time, place, history, and whereby a sense of being is, of course, confirmed. We had then, because this was an economic empowerment project and not an artistic project, the challenge of having to explain to UNHCR and really anybody else involved how we'd modify this for sale. And I hadn't thought that bit through at all, and that's usually what I'm supposed to do. And so we had to modify these artworks to make them into products for sale, which meant adjustment to the stories a little bit and perhaps to the traditional value, bringing into question the authenticity of the pieces. But these works, as you see them right now, are absolutely what the women wanted told, and they had complete authority over what the final piece looked like. So at this point, I wanted to show you a short video. It's the women whose stories are out there. They're not all of them. Many of them simply wouldn't have the permission to be on camera. And I just thought that maybe, because I'm not Afghan, it would be nice if you guys got to see a little bit about the women themselves. Please note, this was an amateur video made by, I thought since we were working in the slums, we need to have filmmakers from the slums. So this was an amateur piece directed by me, who's never done anything like this before. So you will excuse any flaws in the offering. There's voice as well. Yeah.
ما زیاد با سند خرد آرسی کردیم، از سند 15 و 16 آرسی کردیم. یعنی 7 بچه 4 دختر در دنیا آوردیم. 2 تا 3 تا 4 تا 5 تا 6 تا 7 تا 8 تا 9 تا 10 تا 11 تا 12 تا 13 تا 14 تا 15 تا 16 تا 17 تا 18 تا 19 تا 20 تا 21 تا 22 تا 23 تا 24 تا 25 تا 26 تا 27 تا 28 تا 29 تا 30 تا 31 تا 32 تا 33 تا 34 تا 35 تا 36 تا 37 تا 38 تا 39 تا 40 تا 41 تا 42 تا 43 تا 44 تا 45 تا 46 تا 47 تا 48 تا 49 تا 50 تا 51 تا 52 تا 53 تا 54 تا 55 تا 56 تا 57 تا 58 تا 59 تا 60 تا 61 تا 62 تا 63 تا 64 تا 65 تا 66 تا 67 تا 68 تا 69 تا 70 تا 71 تا 72 تا 73 تا 74 تا 75 تا 76 تا 77 تا 78 تا 79 تا 80 تا 81 تا 82 تا 83 تا 84 تا 85 تا 86 تا 87 تا 88 أنا مرداق منطقة دوباره شادی کرد زن گرفت ما را یله کرد رفت أنا زندگی من صحیح نبود دو تا دخترم بسیار بخصندی خرد نشوی دادم أنا دو تا دیگهش قای خودم هستن نمیخوایم که اونا بسند خرد اونا را ما نشوی بیتم اونا را میخوایم که خودم کار کنم زحمت بکشم دخترام بخوانه آینده شان صحیح شد
अस्सलाम वालेकुम मेरा नाम रकीबा है मेरी शादी छोटी उम्र में हुआ है 16 साल में इसकी वजह से मैं अभी चाहती हूँ कि सारी लड़कियों की शादी इतनी जल्दी ना हो सारी लड़कियाँ पता नहीं मैं तो अपनी बेटी को तो यही समझ के पढ़ा रही हूँ जॉब भी दिलवा रही हूँ मैं चाहती हूँ कि सारी लड़कियाँ ऐसा हो सारी लड़कियों की शादी छोटी उम्र में ना हो कभी कभी इन लोगों को अपने माँ बाप से इजाज़त लेके या वहाँ घूमने भी लेके जाती हूँ बर्गर खाने पिज़्ज़ा खाने क्योंकि मेरे खुद को इजाज़त नहीं था मैं खुद घर में बैठ के बोर होती थी सांस बंद होती थी बहुत तकलीफ़ में थी मैं चाहती हूँ कि दूसरी लड़कियों के साथ ऐसा ना हो मैं चाहती हूँ कि सारी लड़कियों को फर मिले जैसा कि हम लोगों के साथ हुआ है वैसा दूसरी लड़कियों के साथ ना हो।
अस्सलाम वालेकुम मेरा नाम अस्मा है मैं किचन में पैदा हुई हूँ एक्चुअली दरअसल बात ऐसी है कि जब मैं पैदा होने वाली थी उसी टाइम सडनली घर में मेहमान आए थे गेस्ट आए थे तो मेरी अम्मी किचन में थी वो खाना बना रही थी जब उनको पेन हुआ तो मेरी सिस्टर गई उस अरसे में दरअसल हालात कुछ ऐसे थे कि कोई हॉस्पिटल जा ही नहीं सकते थे शायद हॉस्पिटल था नहीं या फिर और तो कोई इजाज़त नहीं थी कि हॉस्पिटल चली जाए वो ऐसा समझते थे कि कोई दाया हो या कोई वो हो जो घर में आके उनको विलादत दे फिर जब तक मेरी सिस्टर चली गई उस दाई को लेने मैं जब तक वो आई मैं पैदा हो चुकी थी मैंने उनसे हेलो हाय भी की और अब चूँकि मैं किचन में पैदा हुई हूँ मैं ज़्यादा खाती हूँ मेरी माँ हमारे रिलेटिव सब ये कहते हैं कि तुम किचन में पैदा हुई हो तुम्हें कुछ खाना बनाने की जगह कुछ कुकिंग करने की जगह तुम्हें खाना खाना ज़्यादा आता है मुझे खाना खाने की शौक़ है बहुत ज़्यादा मुझे बहुत पसंद है कि मैं बाहर जाऊँ बाहर घूमूँ मैकडोनल्ड KFC का बर्गर खाऊँ ये चीज़ें और मैं आई लव ईटिंग।
अस्सलाम वालेकुम मेरा नाम हसीना है और मेरा भी बहुत अच्छी तरह जैसे अफ़गानी डिश जो है वो बहुत अच्छी तरह पकाती है और जैसे उनको मैं देख के मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगा कि ताकि मैं भी उनकी तरह सीखूँ और इसी तरह लजीज अफ़गानी जो हमारे देश से इसी तरह मैं भी पकाने लगूँ जैसे हम मेरा भी अफ़गानी चावल पकाते हैं तो सारे हमारे घर पे खुश हो जाती है कि चल हमारे अभी अफ़गानी चावल पका रही है और सारी इसी तरह हर जगह पे जमा होकर वेट करते हैं कि कब ये पक के आ जाएंगे कि हम खाने शुरू करेंगे तो इसीलिए मुझे भी वो बहुत खुशी हो गया चलो मैंने कहा कि मैं भी सीखो और अभी इसी तरह मैं भी सीखे और उनकी तरफ मैं भी अफ़गानी पुलाव जो मंथो और वगैरह बहुत ज़्यादा अफ़गानी जो जैसे वो भी मैंने सीखा है और उनकी तरफ अभी बनाने लगी हूँ मुझे बहुत ज़्यादा खुशी हो रही है।
Just a tiny bit left. Do we still have time? Okay. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on the stories. I was talking, I think, Alice, to you yesterday about, or was it somebody else? But I was talking about how I heard these stories first just as the restrictions from the pandemic were being removed in late 2020. And then we began to work on the artworks in 2021. What's interesting is that when we were going to make this video, as you can tell, not everybody had the permission to be there, and there's degrees to which they can interact with the audience. The woman at the start can't even show her eyes, and then as you get to the younger population, it improves a little bit, but depending on context. What fascinated me, and I think this was kind of linked to some of the conversations we were having yesterday, was how they changed the story for you. And the element of the story that they changed for you was their age when they got married. I didn't question it. This video was made at a very difficult time, as I said, when they're being asked to leave and there's a lot of pain and anxiety, and we spoke a lot about that when I went to make this. And they said over and over, we're doing this for you. It is a gift for you. But of course they had questions about who would see the end product, and I told them about you as best I could. And so they edited their ages. And it's amazing because prior to this, for 3 years, I'd always heard the number 12 and 13. But if you notice in the presentation, it is 16. And I think it says so much about how we want to represent ourselves to the world. So they didn't change anything else. They just changed that number. And yeah, I think then I began to reflect a lot on that because that was the most difficult piece to work on, the child bride piece. And I thought, my gosh, that was the bit that hurt them the most. That was the part of their story that they carry the most shame, the most pain for. So anyway, I just want to talk about that before we get into some of the stories. So the textiles are outside. This one is called The Gift of Giving, and it's Raqiba's story, who you heard on the screen. The first time we spoke about this, she wasn't obviously telling me. So none of these stories were collected as part of a survey or an instrument or a workshop. They were all told in very informal settings. And then when we began to work on the textiles, we iterated as we went, and then they added details or removed them. And she said that I wish I could hide them all in my burqa and run away. One of the things that has fascinated me about Raqiba a great deal is that she's the same age as me. And when I look at her life and mine, and we really grew up in the same city, it amazes me, and I think it just reinforces for me just how much responsibility you carry with the privileges that you have. I'm sorry, I always get a little bit, we'll move on to how we then tried to make this something that Raqiba could, make a living out of. So how do you sell these stories? And for us, it was using these textiles on bags. That's Raqiba making the girls run away. Like to giving them wings, as she said. So this story, Asma, who obviously, as you could tell, can speak a little bit of English, and she's really confident, and she's often used, I think she's possibly the face of the community, because somehow when she was very young, she managed to coerce her father to let her come on camera, and everybody discovered what a natural she is, and they haven't stopped her. She's now 19, and she's hilarious. This girl tells the dirtiest jokes, I tell you. But it was her story that inspired the entire collection, because when we were eating, now Asma is this tiny, skinny, petite little girl, and at the time I think she was about 16, and she challenged me to a food eating competition. And I said, well, really, Asma, look at me and look at you. Who is going to win? I feel like this is not a fair competition. And she said to me, oh, I can eat a lot because I was born in the kitchen. And I said, what do you mean you were born in the kitchen? And that's when, again, the story is told in such a light-hearted way that you take away from the fact that in a village in Afghanistan, this woman gave birth while cooking for guests. And that there was no space in the family for her. There was nobody who came to her. And the only people who were there were her very young children. So the daughter who goes to get the dye in that story is 5 years old at that point. So obviously it's a terribly painful story, but it speaks to how the women find humor and joy even in extremely difficult circumstances. And this is a quote from Asma when we were writing the story. So I called it Little Girl, Big Appetite because of her appetite for life, not just food. So by the way, the KFC and McDonald's was specifically for you guys also. I'll just have you know. She felt that you might understand better if she referenced those brands. So she's very clear. She doesn't like cooking or eating home-cooked foods. She loves burgers and pizzas. So anytime she wants something from me, the trade-off is always, will you buy me pizza? And I'm just like, yes, I will. So with the child bride theme, unfortunately, most women, even a decade younger than me, would have been married very, very young. It's beginning to change a little bit. And again, I talk about a specific context in Karachi within one specific refugee community. And it's partly because of the leadership there that now marriages are being delayed. But most women would have been married very, very young. And This is something one of the women who's not on the video told me, that she hadn't seen her family. She doesn't even know if they're alive, because women are married across the border. So you might have been raised in Afghanistan and then married off in Pakistan somewhere, or vice versa. You might have been raised in Karachi your whole life, and then through marriage, you go back to a village in Afghanistan. And if you've been raised in a city, you're suddenly in an agrarian setting. It's quite a difficult transition. So yeah, that's the official statistic. I believe this number is now rising because of obviously extreme poverty and very difficult conditions. So food, right? It's Afghan food is really popular in Pakistan as well. Like, we love it, and the Afghans take great pride in the food. If you have not tried it, I can strongly recommend that you do. And this was, again, an older lady. She requested that I not share her name, because traditional Afghan women believe that the sharing of their names, especially women's name, outside the family is special, and it's a privilege, and it's not given to everybody. But she would laugh and say, you know, when I was trying to make this piece and I was trying to help them figure out the ingredients, and, you know, we had this young illustrator with us, and we would struggle because they would all keep changing the recipe, because everybody obviously has their individual take on it. And then one of the women, again, name redacted, said, oh, forget about all this. The most important ingredient is love. So at a time with, you know, economic downturn in the world, inflation, lack of respect for women, frankly, growing, and deep misogyny becoming deeper, as well as, I think, you know, a very greed-driven consumer culture, which we've talked about a lot yesterday, where we all buy mass-produced as modern, and we like to put labels all over ourselves, and we reject cultural wares as dated and devalued. A lot of the conversation for me is about how do you persuade people to buy local, to support literally livelihoods, and in doing so, create space for young women makers and reduce, at the same time, your carbon footprint. Could there be a better pitch than that? This should not be hard. So again, because I talked about how Asma is allowed to have her image out there, that's her on the swings. I really wanted to insert, so I'm terrible with technology. I know I'm not supposed to be. I'm an elder millennial. I can't help it. I couldn't insert the clip, but in this video, Sonia and Asma, so Sonia has an eye infection. That's the sunglasses. Pink eye was rampant in Pakistan just before I came. They were swinging, and they were making a TikTok, which was in Farsi, but unfortunately, I just wanted to kind of like share that image, that there is a lot of joy in the spaces that keeps them very relevant for women, no matter what lens you approach it from. So the ethos of craft-based production, of course, is pro-nature and pro-people, and I've always felt that the artisan economy has the innate ability to drive beyond socioeconomic mobility. Circularity is a part of the process, mindful consumption, the use of local resources, low waste, and the formation of alliances that both revive indigenous crops and materials. And I think in the refugee context, this is particularly important because they are forced to break out of their cycles that they know, and because they're based in a particular season, in a particular geography, at a particular time, and then when they're moved, it's very hard for them to replicate the same indigenous practices in a new context. But the shared values, the collective learning, women are custodians of this, and they create these self-sustaining lifestyles. In these contexts, there are jobs for all. You can be differently able, you can be completely illiterate, you can be marginalized in more than one. They don't seek perfection. They seek inclusion. As a matter of fact, one of the communities I work with, the leader of that group is a dwarf. And absolutely nobody would think to comment on that. I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday about how trans people are just, until recently, weren't labeled, were just included. And nobody really felt the need to comment on that. They were just people, and they were a little different. So they were quirky, but you thought, okay, they're quirky, you know. But these artisan hubs, particularly for refugee women and the leadership within them, are key to the future where women are agents and active change makers in their own lives. And again, just kind of circling back to where we began, that I think it's important that we not just see low-income host artisans or refugees as a labor class to be exploited that can make, and we look at the intrinsic value of what they bring to the conversation. So it's a people and planet first sector that deserves visibility if we are really sincere about this new green economy led by creative and cultural capital, and if we truly want to harness the potential of people who are dependent on craft for their livelihoods. These bags, which I was talking about earlier, have, well, fingers crossed, been selected as Made 51 as part of their catalog offering later this year, so they should hopefully be available for sale in Europe. We're going to be sending the samples as soon as I get back, and I really hope it works, because that would mean that these stories led to income in a bigger way than we could have imagined. So I'm going to end where I started, with the words of Auden. Came to a public meeting, the speaker got up and said, "If we let them in, they will steal our daily bread." He was talking of you and me, my dear. He was talking of you and me. Now, in Pakistan, this is a narrative that ebbs and flows. And the reason why it ebbs is because we do share a lot of historic, cultural, language-based traits with the Afghans, especially if you're on that side of the border. There's a long border we share with them, which means that, especially in the border areas, people are very receptive because they see them as kin. But in the larger cities, where we're perhaps more westernized, it's not necessarily the case. Just very, very quickly, I wanted to end on one point that I related to some of the conversations that we've been having. So you would have noticed a lot of visuals of hands. And we saw hands, I think, a lot of hands yesterday as well. In Richard's case, I think they were meant to symbolize that he's a maker, and there was hands with technology, and they were all empowering images. They were all empowering stories. But I have to be honest and say the hands in my narrative are not empowering. They're there to hide the makers. They're there to make the women invisible and socially acceptable, because this is how we like our women, quiet and unseen and doing the labor that needs to be done. But I hope that with the sharing of these stories, and that you will pick up the postcards and take some of it along with you and keep it in your heart and your mind, I'll also reference the threading activity we did last night for Picha Kucha, and we were talking about memory and identity and feeling and how you leave a mark in a piece of thread. So these women have left their mark in these textiles outside, and I really hope that you will enjoy and experience them. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amne. My goodness,
you for letting me,
was
Alice.
an extraordinary presentation. And I just wanted to sort of add that we've got a project with the BTB Common Threads with some of the groups that you're familiar with, and we very much hope to expand that to link with some of the Afghan groups telling these stories. So this idea that we gain agency through these connections, through these conversations, and we reveal lives. Yeah. So I'm going to invite questions to Amne. Anyone like to offer a question? Yes? We got a...
Hi, thank you. That was... Is it working? Yeah, fascinating. Thank you. I just had a question about the word refugee and what it actually means and how we can understand it. I mean, obviously, at the moment, there are big issues about refugees, but one of the things I was thinking compared to yesterday is that the phrase indigeneity and how it's connected to land. And a lot of people, when they're working in crafts, they're exploring their relationship to their land. Mm-hmm. And indigeneity is all about connection to a particular land, like vernacular is. But you're working with a group of women who have been dispossessed from their land. So I thought maybe that might be something that's interesting to talk about, how that reflects on the materials that they produce or the subjects they produce, when there isn't that kind of crafting in the project I'm working on, people say they sow what they see. Yeah. So is there, because of the land that they are reflecting in their work?
No, absolutely. So I think if there's two ways I can answer that question. First, refugee is a really difficult term to answer as a Pakistani, right? So first, we're Muslim, which means that the basis of Islam was based on migration and refugees. So there's a whole emotional connect to that, which means that we as Muslims, which means there was a shared narrative between Afghanistan and Pakistan, would see it in a particular light. I don't want to delve too deeply on that, but I just wanted to kind of signify that there is an element of importance of being kind to refugees, and it's kind of at the core of the religion. And then, of course, you have the partition of the subcontinent, which means that most of us had grandparents who were refugees at some point, and we grew up with stories about refugees, about loss, about yearning for home and yearning for land. So it's not alien. And then, of course, as I said, my generation grew up with Afghan refugees all around us, sometimes criminalized, mostly villainized, and I think hated and feared. But once you cross that barrier, you just realize that there's so much, I think, in our country where we share with them that it makes it easier. In Pakistan, they're kept in a perpetual refugee state, so even people who are born, they don't get citizenship by birth. It's a very complex issue. But in terms of how they create, I think there is a loss. That's what and I think it is connected to the fact that they have been dispossessed of land. Particularly interesting, Rakiba and her family had gone back to the village they're from, which is outside Kabul. It's called Talhar. And when I'd gone to make this film, she was showing me photographs because they were upset, right, about what the government was doing. And they're like, well, we don't really want to say, but look what Afghanistan looks like, right? And what was fascinating for me, beyond the pain of that statement, was how green and how pretty it really was. I think, because given it was outside Kabul, I imagined that it would be more like a city. It really wasn't. And I understood that when we are asking them to create what was done there, here, we're asking almost the impossible. But I think there's been such a loss of tradition in terms of materials across the subcontinent, if I was to include Afghanistan in that as well. Simple things like, we no longer grow indigo in Pakistan. It was simple things like we don't have our own materials anymore. We don't respect our seasonality. When I was in school, we were taught Pakistan is an agrarian economy. We were told that 70% of our income came from agriculture. Now, if this was true 20, 25 years ago, less than 30% of our income comes from agriculture now. So things are changing for the worse rapidly, and I think there's a loss even outside the refugee space. But you're right, that this is a complex thing, and the materials have completely changed for them. So now, particularly when you're looking at the high-value market, the buyers want us to use anchor thread, which, by the way, is the thread on this scarf as well, which is really hard to get in Pakistan. It's really expensive. But that's what they use. Certainly nobody was using this indigenously, so we've had to evolve. I don't know if that fully answers it, but...
Can I ask a quick one? Sorry. Please speak to Amne again later in the lunch break if we have time. Yes. I'm interested in how the women and the young women are able to articulate their truth through their work, and how problematic that is within their community. Clearly, these are stories that remain hidden, remain impossible to articulate, and yet they are revealing them in these works.
I think that's interesting. For the first response was, why would anybody want to hear this story? Like, they didn't think these stories had value because they're so common and they're so everyday, especially the stories. The only one they kind of understood was the archiving of the recipe. That everybody was very invested in me getting perfectly right and had so much feedback for the illustrator. But everything else, they saw it as... They saw it as funny that I wanted to do this. And for them, I think this idea that they were very keen to know what you would think of these stories. And they're curious as to how the world would receive them, because among them, they're common stories. So Asma was born in the kitchen. She wasn't the only person born like that. There were lots and lots of much more horrific births. There are many, many, and I think for me it was hard to sift out some of the dark stories, because I knew that eventually I had to commodify this work. And how do you sell a dark story? I mean, so I think there's there's all of that. But yeah, it's, I think, difficult, but these artworks allow it because it's not signed. It doesn't individualize anybody here. Can I?
I'm just thinking in that case, perhaps what we could all do is give Amne as a gift back how we read those stories.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
They'd love
that. So maybe you could all write something. And are we okay? I'm really sorry. Very quick one.
Sorry, and it might not be a quick one. It was actually a question about like the process. You mentioned the illustrator there. I was just wondering, you've gathered these ladies' stories. Do they design the image themselves from their own drawings? Is that then taken to an artist who then, what's your process?
So originally I thought we could just get the women to draw it themselves. That didn't work because they don't want to tell. They would draw quite literally for many of them. So this was part of a communications workshop that we were also doing. So they were capturing video footage and photographs. And I think those were really helpful because they would take specific images for us and share them with us. But then we just had to sit with them and draw and redraw. And we took elements from what they had drawn, but we definitely borrowed a great deal from the photography and the videography that they had done. They were given cell phones, like cheap cell phones, to use to try and document what they felt would be an authentic rendition of the story.
I'm so sorry. We're running behind time, so
Well,
we'd love to
thank
talk
you
to
so
you
much
more,
again.
but please speak to Amne later. Thank you. That was
Hello everyone, I'm Bethany. Some of you will have met me yesterday, a PhD researcher and teaching assistant across design here at Manchester School of Art. And our final panel of the conference I'd like to introduce is comprised of a series of provocative in-conversations between artists, practitioners and researchers that explore how textiles enable connections through community-based collaborative practices. First up, we've got Shelley Holden, Sean Lester and Imogen Mills, 3 Wales-based artists involved in an ongoing collaboration called TAT, Textile and Text. So if you'd like to welcome them to the stage.
Okay, so we're not going to do a formal presentation. I'm just going to introduce you first then. So yeah, we are 3, more or less, artists, lecturers, mothers, students, researchers, textilers, makers, thinkers, partners, practitioners, educators, natterers, tatterers, collaborators. We formed TAT last year after 3 previous years of interactions. So in this entanglement, we find gaps in our daily lives, our very busy daily lives, which I know loads of people will relate to meet and make, to talk and test textile, and laugh a lot. We currently have 2 projects in process or in progress. So we've currently been working on a mail art project or sketchbook project and also a materials exchange project. So we're going to start by showing or introducing you to a short film that we've made which kind of documents some of these kind of exchanges that we've been having over the course of the year. We're then going to follow over to a table where we're going to open our second materials exchange. So we haven't rehearsed this, we haven't opened the boxes because we really wanted it to be a live event and we really wanted to enable you to join in with this conversation. So we're going a bit ad hoc here. So we'll come over there, we'll show the film. Yeah.
Maybe we can have a bit of sound on the film too, if that's possible. Which ones? Oh, that side.
Yeah. It's the ones that we made.
That's for you.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's for me.
9th of December.
Oh.
I think that's when
that was the first one.
I think.
Oh, so we met in November of 2022.
I suppose what's really nice as well is that we don't necessarily stick to like, oh, and on to the next page.
No, we don't.
No. It's like, oh, I'm going to add a little bit there.
Oh, no.
One instant polar camera. It's not like, it's not a letter faro orange silk twist thread, a 2B pencil, a 6B pencil, a fine line pen, 3 ciabatta roll.
But the difference is, but the thing is, the whole point is, it is about time, duration, and small pockets.
It's in pockets of time, squeeze it in amongst. So I think that was really nice to kind of reiterate.
The object as the object, would you
cut some of those and spring them out, or I don't know. It's
brilliant. And where's this
you
from?
modify.
Then?
You can do
I've
some
got loads of these little bits and pieces as well. It's because you came to the studio when you were trying to unblock me making something, and you said just sit in your shed.
That was just immersed in the dye pot.
Do you remember?
Yeah, I do. With the threads wrapped around, and then you bring it back up to temperature.
And I was reading what I said about my work then, and I thought that's interesting because that's years ago now.
Oh my gosh, that's lovely stuff. That's meadow sweet, and that's buttercups.
Aluminium mesh for
my stuff is from
DIY stuff, so that's screen for plastic.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that just glistens, doesn't it? Wow. This has all been recent dyeing, so this is
a thing now. I want to make a squidgy thing. That's what I want to do and incorporate these.
You take their materials and make what you make.
Yeah. But meadow sweet was always used on the floor of a house.
We're just going to leave it playing in the background, are we? Okay.
So yeah, just to introduce what we're doing here, we've given each other boxes of materials. They are pieces of our unfinished work and the materials of our process, and then we give them to each other, and this is us opening it up blindly, so we don't know what we've all managed to do, so it's really exciting. So Shelley, I gave Shelley a roll of black rusted iron wire, which is my material of making in my weave process. I weave but off looms. I'm trying to understand about the weave process and the mechanics involved in it and the work and labour. But what have you done here then? How have you... is this knitted or...?
So this was, so you had a piece of paper and you introduced the idea of your warp and weft.
Yeah.
And because as a weaver, obviously that's the way, the idea of the structure, but also of the hard and soft material was very kind of, significant to the way that you think through your materials. But for me, it's more about a looping or a knotting or a coiling. So we're still producing a mesh of sorts, but it kind of produces this other kind of iteration of a type of textile making. So that just seemed like a sort of organic kind of response to how I kind of, then interpreted your work, but also during the box that I made, which really happened over the course of one day where I was literally sat in the shed again. I had this kind of idea that sort of came into my mind about them being a series of response drawings, because at the same time I had the radio playing in the background, and it was last weekend actually, after all the awful kind of events that we've been listening to on the radio, and it just kind of felt like it was not literally being interpreted in the materials, but that kind of making enabled a kind of way of being and living in that space and trying to feel some of those awful kind of events. And actually, I could cry because I was thinking, just listening to the previous speaker and just thinking how our lives are so different. And it was just a way to live with that, try and live with that experience for a minute. And that's what, for me, making really does. It gives the time to things.
And about being really present as well, isn't it?
Present
with what's going on around us and responding to that.
So on Indifference then, we've got Sian have had Shelley's box here. So what has been going on?
Yeah, so Shelley gave me a box of what you call is all sorts of scrappy bits, but they're not. But they're all sorts of beautiful bits and pieces.
They are.
Yeah, but they're also
offcuts or leftovers. Yeah,
they're also pieces that Shelley had started to construct. And they were all off-white, cream, or white. So it was like it's like starting with a blank canvas, but there were still, as I emphasised, there were still kind of pieces that were very much had Shelley's hands sewn into or stuffed little elements. So I'm a natural dyer. So my inclination is always to colour things, and my love of colour. So I had some excess dye pots from some school workshops I've been doing. So I had a madder dye pot, and I had a
an apple leaf dye pot as well. So in went all these elements. No nettles, I'm afraid. That had gone. But so all of these pieces went in the dye pot and then were reformed. There were some shibori techniques. So a lot of folding. I think there's this sort of element when you've got a box, everything kind of has to go back into the box as well, which is really sort of a lovely concept. But there's also some things that kind of spring out of the box as well. So they've got some life. They can hang, they can move.
There's also this element of when we, especially when you've got something half finished from somebody else's work, there's this wincing of like, oh, what can I do with that? And can I touch it? And can I ruin it? Can I take it apart? So there's there's quite a lot of risk involved in it. But what we're, I guess, trying to do is try and blur the boundaries between the who has done what. And we've got this book that quite unmistakably is a book with an index that's got missing eye, which has become our collection point for the words that we use and the language that we use. So we're trying to collect ourselves together.
This just makes me sort of retrace back to thinking about Christine's discussion yesterday. It was only yesterday, wasn't it? It feels like because a lot's happened since then. So Sian's starting to. So she's. There we go. So I started off by giving a piece of work where it was actually started during COVID, where, as you'll all appreciate, this expression, have you washed your hands? Have you washed your hands? Have you washed your hands? It was just like all the time. It was just like constant. And it came up on a film I was watching at the time, which was related to my research, which was to do with, this kind of boundary of being in the home, as many of us were during that time. So I started to play with that idea of impressing these words, which felt so kind of embedded in the way that we were living our life at the time, and thinking about the cleanliness and also the kind of lack of kind of contact with material things, because our experiences, well, as researchers and sort of educators, lecturers, obviously we had this boundary of the the laptop all the time, but also all the mess and havoc of kind of home life and homeschooling and all of that kind of complexity. So this was kind of, I guess, a sort of interface of trying to hand that back to Sian to see how she might interpret that. And actually, she's put the image of the hands overlaid onto the printing.
A thimble and a needle.
You can see that.
So there's also some text on the back in response to Shelley's written work as well, just about kind of sort of how we're interacting with this project amongst our other sort of educational sort of responsibilities and of being a mother and responding. So there's a series of texts within the piece as well that responds to how we're sort of fitting these boxes and sketchbooks within our daily rituals and our lives.
So,
Yeah,
Sian,
yeah.
what about you? Let's see what you've unpacked from in your box.
That's our missing.
So,
I love that, the missing eye.
So this is Imogen's response to some materials that I had handed to Imogen. Imogen is a weaver, as she has already explained. So she has responded by weaving in. I think I gave you some nettle yarn, didn't I? I think I've been given some nettle yarn from Nepal, actually. So Imogen has woven some of the nettle yarn within this piece.
It's quite interesting, though, because with the materials that Sian works with, a lot of her threads are short, they are quite messy and they're quite tangled, and as a weaver I need to organise them and sort them out. So actually working with Sian's threads then becomes quite complicated. So what I've ended up doing is I've got a few ways in which I've tried to organise them. So I've got a pern in here somewhere. I've put some of the yarns, can we see what we're doing here? I've put some of the yarns on the sort of tools that we try and organise things. So I've stitched and couched on some of her nettle thread here, and then also wrapped her threads onto a pern, which is obviously part of my weave activity.
So you're trying to tidy me up?
I'm trying to tidy her up all the time.
I think this is what a really interesting, though, response is, because I think there's an element of taking on the other person's practice as well. When you're given this box, there's almost this responsibility to honour your practice, and then sort of putting your mark on things as well and responding. But I think it's a really interesting, as well as kind of then giving a box, you're also letting go of your own practice too.
The way that Sian works, obviously, with the natural dyeing, it's a very, very slow process. And also, you know, there's a lot of plant work, so therefore there's lots of associations around eating. And Sian often puts in bits and pieces that are actually pieces of food. So these were eggshells that were just, I mean, I ended up breaking several more. So these are eggshells that are now being covered in jesmonite. And they've got pieces of bound black iron wire, so I'm bringing a bit of my practice back in again.
Yeah, it's lost its original, you know, stepped away from its original form, isn't it? Yeah,
but there's always elements of food in the pieces
that
you put together.
And I loved the reference, your previous speaker, I loved your reference to this bringing food in to that community, and we are always sort of, things do revolve around, right, I'll bring the croissants, you know, and I think we've even got a list of things. One day Shelley had written a list of 3 bread rolls. You know, so there is always that lovely sense of, okay, we're getting together to create, but we're also getting together to share. And that's not just thoughts, that's life, I think, as well, you know, with our food. And
so this is the first time that we've unpacked this in any sort of public space. This has come off our domestic spaces. It's crazy, it's cluttered, it's textile, it's tasseled up together. We are planning on some group shows, and we're going to continue to collaborate through different exchanges of materials, and we'll see where it goes. But it was a real honour to come and share this with you today, and do come and chat and ask us questions.
Thank you.
It's chaos.
Right, we'll leave it, should we? Yeah, we'll leave it. There we go.
Thanks to Shelley, Sian and Imogen. I want to be part of your sketchbook circle and come for the snacks now as well. Our second collaborative conversation is from Dr. Claire Wellesley-Smith and Lynn Setterington. Dr. Claire Wellesley-Smith is an artist, writer and researcher based in Bradford, West Yorkshire. Her projects and her research are situated within arts, heritage, community and well-being in the UK and internationally. The ability of textiles to transform and connect over time inform her studio, curatorial and research practices. Lynn Setterington is a major British textile artist known for her hand-stitched quilts, embroideries and collaborations with community organisations and museums. She creates tactile social history documents and works with groups to interrogate social injustice, celebrate the overlooked and the everyday. Her research draws on popular culture, folk and textile history, and she's undertaken many large-scale commissions and partnerships with unserved communities, museums and archives. So please welcome Lynn and Claire to the stage.
Can you hear us? Is that yeah. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having us today. So this is a bit scary because we know each other's work, but we haven't worked together as such. And we kind of decided, we had a conversation and said we'd put together 10 slides each of our past work, to kind of share with you. So hopefully that will be on a sort of rolling programme in the background. Could somebody do that? Is anybody doing that?
And also I sneakily put an extra slide in. So I've got 11.
That's right.
But yeah, we've kind of we've managed to find 3 T's within our conversation. So those will be tables, tabletops, time and transformation, which we think might kind of inform our chat, really. So
I wanted to add transgressions in there as well. But so we'll wait for the images to come up. Gemma don't know where she's gone, So I'll just fill in while we're waiting. Finding 10 images was quite a challenge, because I've been working sort of, 40 years, about 30 collaboratively with communities and groups, and so picking 10 was quite a difficult thing, so that it's quite random as well, and we had to pick them so far in advance. So if it had been yesterday, I could have picked them and responded to the conversations yesterday, but it was sent ages ago, so you'll have to go with us on that one and hope they're... God, let's wait and see. So I'll just fill in as well a bit more. We're both from Yorkshire,
We are
yes?
both from Yorkshire, yeah. We're both from Yorkshire, but our contact previously has been through some work that you contributed to a book I wrote about stitching and resilience. And then last year, Lynn's amazing work, Safety Net, which I think is included in your slides. Was exhibited as part of a curatorial project I had in a museum of psychiatry in Ghent in Belgium. And in fact, part of it is still on display, large section of it.
I think there's an image coming up there,
We've got...
So these are Claire's images.
They are.
Hopefully mine are coming.
Yeah, well, I could talk a little bit about my images. So we're back to hands again. There's a lot of hands in these images, and making and hand making, really. And the tabletops that we were thinking about are in what I describe as spaces of ordinary care. So I'm thinking about hospitals and community centres and church halls, marketplaces. They're kind of really everyday spaces, and they're spaces that are constantly in transformation. So, I mean, I'm sure Lynn you've had experiences like this where your session is bookended by a Zumba class and and a cook and eat group, and quite often the whole thing gets quite muddled up, and you end up with maybe a talk about recycling in the neighbourhood while you're actually doing your craft session. So there's a lot of kind of things that are happening around that stillness that you get with hand making, and particularly hand stitching. So I've chosen images that are mostly of stitching. My work is in post-industrial textile communities, so across the north of England. I work in places that would be described as really very underserved today. I work with women's groups, I work with refugee and asylum seeker groups. I work in community mental health organisations, and within those sessions I try to, or the projects that I work on, try to bring in a sense of the textile heritage to the conversations that we have. But that kind of side-by-side working, and that question that is kind of really been really important to my work for 20 years now is, how does it feel to live in post-industrial textile areas? That's been my whole life, really, living in places that were, huge kind of hotbeds of kind of industrial activity, which have changed their pace. They've changed the way that people are able to connect. Your slides.
Yeah, my slides, Mine's a real mix, like I said. So I think Claire's maybe more been based around the Bradford area, kind of your sort of home territory, is it? Kind of working very embedded with lots of different community groups. Mine sort of links to being in the northwest, kind of, although I'm from Yorkshire, but my kind of trajectory was really sort of seeing an exhibition of Kantha work back in the late 80s, which are quilts from Bengal, and I saw a sort of similarity. There were women's cloths made by communities of women, and they were stitching ordinary objects of their lives, and I was at the home doing the same thing, stitching objects from my life, and I kind of sort of went home and literally created my own piece, kind of inspired by these quilts, and that really was the start for me of kind of then going on to work with all different sorts of groups and communities and seeing the value in kind of stitching together. And I think one of the things for me that's really interesting is that thing of having to think on your feet. And as Claire said, with going to out, I see myself a bit as an ethnographic embroiderer as well, going out into communities and working in different spaces that you don't know what the setup's going to be, and mostly it's fine, but sometimes you have to be very adaptable. And I think seeing how and where people live and kind of going out to them rather than them having to come into your safe space is really interesting and kind of important. But it is that thing of how you adapt. But working with stitch, hand stitch, as we both do, there's lots of flexibility. My car boot is my constant workshop that I can stick everything in and transport it wherever I'm going. So, kind of all those things. Because I remember when I was doing my PhD, I put a picture of my car boot in, and my tutor, Simon Olding's like, why are you including this? And it's like, well, this is really crucial. This is so important.
That's really funny. In my PhD thesis, I've got a whole section about my car boot, actually.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, just this kind of, and actually the car boot, at the point where I feel I've really kind of got to know the people that I'm working with in a particular community setting, quite often what I'd do is I'd leave the stuff in the car boot, and then I'd go in and we'd all have a cup of tea, and I'd kind of spend some time just reading the room before I decide what's coming out of the car boot.
Okay,
so it's a really huge part of being able to sort of listen and think through your materials and understand which materials are right for that moment.
Yeah. I think it's also the responsibility kind of as well that I realise when you're working communally, sort of that, the car boot can be the place that holds all that information or all that work that you've gathered, and you then have to kind of make sure it's safe and kind of that's the weight on your shoulders, because as hearing in the earlier talk about kind of people's lives being stitched into the cloth, and often people who don't have a lot of visibility, kind of the stitching is their marker of sort of identity. So kind of that's a really important thing to kind of be able to share the work and show it in different venues.
It's a huge responsibility, and I still feel absolutely terrible about a very small embroidery of an elephant that was done by a participant in a group that I'd worked with over, I think now I've worked with them on and off for nearly 15 years, and the elephant, we never knew what happened.
Disappeared.
It disappeared, but it was terrible.
Yeah. Oh no, I know.
That elephant haunts me, I'd have to say. She was really nice about it, but it was really very much part. It was a small piece of stitching, but actually it's very much part of a small story that actually became a much bigger one around the table. And I think the storytelling that we've heard about this morning is really kind of, there we are. It can be really, really powerful, the way these things start to link together when projects have the appropriate amount of time.
Yeah.
So I was actually going to ask you about that, Lynn. I've had the privilege in the last 20 years of having some projects that have really given me a long time working with the same people. In one case, a project that ended up as part of the first British Textile Biennial. I worked with people for nearly 6 years.
Wow.
And so how do you feel about the time that you actually spend with groups, and how does that work for you?
Yeah. I mean, there's never enough, let's say, that time. I think it's a difficult one as well, because I think that I am quite prolific and I like making. That's what I like doing. I like working with people and kind of the visual, the creative outputs of what I do. But I realise how enormous the projects are, and kind of you need downtime afterwards to kind of reflect and assess and kind of take on board all those things. But actually then writing up or kind of doing articles about that is a huge amount of time as well. And kind of you being that one sort of holder of knowledge, which you kind of have to be in a way as the person who sort of orchestrates things, kind of, you know, obviously there's lots of different voices in there, but kind of you're the one who sees all those elements through. That's the time as well, kind of. So it's really difficult. So I was saying one of the things is that you never know when you start a project exactly all the outcomes, because there's so many serendipitous things which I love kind of that happen, and kind of stories that emerge. Thank you. And people coming and sort of sharing with you, you know, their lives kind of, and it's like, you know, how do you manage all that in the time you have? It's really, really difficult. But I think the lovely thing, which I'm sure we all know with hand stitch, is that it is a sort of, you know, gentle thing that you can transport around, you can share with people. You don't need necessarily to have great skills in it. And I think with some of the projects I do, one of the ones that you'll see, the AIDS quilt that I did back in 2009, Respect and Protect, is just cross stitches, but I love the fact that it's all different sorts of cross stitches, and so that was like about people having their own mark, and kind of you know, how sort of people who couldn't vote, didn't have a signature or writing to vote, would put a cross. It's that kind of thing, but it also links into the whole thing around the AIDS, you know, crisis back then. So kind of finding strategies and making things that are inclusive is also kind of part of what I feel my role is, or kind of to make it so that lots of people can be included and don't feel excluded. So
yeah, well, I mean, I agree, and I think the multiple ways that textiles can transform just with the hands, like you say, a simple mark, or, you know, working with participants who've got huge amount of you know, traditional skill and previous textile knowledge, but somehow in those spaces around the, you know, those tables or in the things that come out of the car boot, you can kind of make sense of them, and they become something completely different in the space.
Following on from the earlier talk, I did a project again, well, 2011, with a refugee group in Manchester, and it was a signature project. People were stitching their names, but there was one lady, and we had flowers on. People were sort of stitching flowers as well. And this one lady came and she stitched. She knew how to stitch. She wanted to be part of it. She didn't have any written language. She was Farsi, and she'd not been taught how to write. So somebody else wrote her name for her, and then she stitched it. So, you know, she became part of it. But otherwise, it was the stitching that was her, you know, is that communication tool that I've realised is really a vital thing. So
I mean, I think in a project that there's a photograph of some of the work, and again, a preference of the participants not to be photographed, just their hands, but where one week we worked out that out of the group of 14 we had 16 languages around the table, but the kind of always the common thing was that someone had forgotten their reading glasses, so it was always people knotting and threading needles for their neighbours,
sharing, fabulous.
Well, I think we're pretty much at time, actually. And the kind of sheer practicality of having somebody to thread your needle for you is like, it's the kind of the really ordinary everydayness of stitching in your own life, but also in community settings, which I think, you know,
amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks to Claire and Lynn. I think we all need somebody to thread our needle for us every now and again. Last but not least, we have Trish Bould and Pom Stanley. Trish and Pom are lifelong friends that have worked together on a series of experimental thread and loom works since 2019. Collectively and individually, their work embodies a felt sense and evokes narrative experiences in the landscape and in life. Employing tacit and distance communication through the making of installations, films, exhibition work, they acknowledge different value systems and share their story and experiences in the making of narrative knots, threads and tangles. So welcome Trish and Pom to the stage.
Thank you.
Just to say, we feel really privileged to be here. amongst the conversations of textile and place. And also at this time of our lives, to have spent so long together making a piece of work. Which was a period of time that's quite special to both of us, because Pom's retired from her NHS position as an art therapist, and I've moved out of academia and from the south, and so we live quite close together again, although most of our lives are spent doing very different things, following different paths. We met here in Manchester, studying in this institution in print weave in the 70s, so it's been quite a long period of time. And today we're sharing our work, loom installation, house as a loom, loom as a house, which links together several projects. And we've got a short film which was made during lockdown, followed by the Q&A. And we've also brought along some materials which we felt were important to be here. So we'd like to move on to the film. Goal suggests that places are like knots, and the threads from which they are tied are lines of wayfaring. A house, for example, is a place where lines of its residents are highly knotted together. But these lines are no more contained within the house than threads are contained within a knot. Rather, they trail beyond it, only to become caught up with other lines in other places.
As we continue to make the film, it's a way of reflecting on our practice and deepening connections, with new ways of working, including the frustrations of being in lockdown.
Like the loom, a film is a framework and a structure through which things can be brought together and created. In this experimental film, we present a collage of image, time, and sound.
We've been working on our installation for a few months, slowly building and testing ways of creating the work. Downing physical tools for virtual tools has meant we have lost an organic process of embodied contact, intuitive interaction and communication.
First marks, one above the other, January this year. The loom upstairs and the table down. A sketch. Materials list. Derelict loom, a personal treasured object and also a deserted heirloom. Elements of the building at Plasbodfer, holes, beams, nails, wires, loose material. Time. 2 rooms, one above the other, with a connected stairway. Loom parts. Threads various. Local stone, including slate, and that from a Neolithic henge. Drawing materials, for example, graphite, chalk and clay. Conversation. When I first came to Anglesey 3 years ago, I joined a community dig at Wilver as part of a team exposing an ancient meeting place. Like the derelict loom, the archaeology and the house at Plasbodfer is fragmented and laid bare, structures incomplete, confused and fragile. Material histories pose connections and bring into tension physical and metaphorical ideas about looms, construction and placemaking.
Traditionally, looms often occupy 2 spaces. The upper space is housing the working mechanism that controls the lower harness and enables the weaving cloth. 2 spaces, one room above the other. Upstairs, a derelict loom, a treasured heirloom, sits in partial light. The threads run through the ceiling and the floor, forming plumb lines grounded with heavy stone. Gold thread creates a wholeness, a through line giving meaning and a sense of purpose, connecting air and earth, above the roof, below the ground, beyond our time. The process of building connections makes links and warp making run between and throughout and between the different spaces.
As we wind down the stairs, multiple viewpoints all form part of the weaving action. Looking in and through, coming round to the front of the loom installation, where threads interlace with light. When we were last at Plas Bodfa in March, a projection of our memories resurfaced and wound and held on a stick became an integral part of the space. The projection formed a beam connecting the building, the loom, and our windings and rewindings, interweaving within the space. The experience embodied the threshold of installation, threads connected above, below, and across, forming a place. Knots, threads, tangles, connecting lines through untold stories. Metaphor allows us to see similarity and difference, enabling us to connect within a world, an unfolding process like a loom. We think of our process as a social exchange, a drawing in the making, and looms of threads have moved between us for many years, sparking many pathways of connection. We've travelled together in Gujarat several times. Pom weaves, and over the years I've used her looms in parts of installations linked to other elements of social exchange. And the looms, the elements of the looms, each section of the loom bringing different metaphoric ideas within a conversation. The installation itself was made in an old manor house and part of an exhibition with many, many people, but never shown to the public. So the film was made during lockdown at distance. We couldn't visit the installation, we couldn't visit each other. It was a real lumpy thing, torn and stitched, created from snippets of film, made really as notes, and included portrait and landscapes, the sort of thing you wouldn't choose to make a film with. And we've shared so much, but we've gotten also a lot of differences. And
yeah, there's a lot of different. Even though we've known each other a long time, we just feel there's been a lot of differences when we've been working together. And we were thinking of what the most valuable experience was, and I feel that the experimental initial underdrawings of the threadworks that we created together in the environment was one of the most important sort of beginnings to the relationship of our working relationship. the importance of finding, discovering the right space to create a meaningful place for reforming the derelict loom. I found this was a familiar way of working and supported my personal process within the challenge of creating my first installation. Making these threadworks, which were created outside, informed the explorative first sketches we made in the upper and lower spaces inside, plus Bodfur. This enabled me to find a structure for the overall collaborative project, reflecting my life events at the time and my sense of being. Here, the flowing warp threads contrasted the tension of the vertical threads. The golden through thread, a plumb line, reached into a light space above and was connected downwards, secured by rocks below, forming a grounded and held space. And Trish, did you want to say something about your ways of working?
Blackbird.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that in mapping out the blackboard, it was more about having a space to write on, bringing in past experience from collaborations from each of us, from our professional lives and other projects. And in this space, it's become a fixed thing, which is quite difficult, really, seeing a blackboard on a screen. But in the next few slides, we'll open up some conversation about metaphor and language and communication that we shared.
You're saying something about the quote that you were interested in when we were working, Trish, coming from different backgrounds of
because Pom comes from, she's an art therapist previously, dealing with adult mental health. In our exchanges, she was bringing to bear some of the ideas from metaphor or ways that she works, which I found really helpful.
Yeah,
she had a lovely quote.
Yeah, it was interesting to see the of what came through from therapeutic practice and what came through in my own practice or our practice. And the metaphor Tricia relates to is the one by Casson, when he talks about metaphor acting as a bridge between the inner and outer and self and other. Sweeney describes this as a space where a deeply felt wordless connection in nature or with a picture can facilitate the surfacing of a chain of subconscious emotions and memories, and where thoughts and feelings can be explored and understood. And I find that being in nature helps me to feel and to where and who I am, and this has led to my interest in the therapeutic benefits of being connected to the natural environment. I'm interested in the idea of the sense of space, sense of place and being. Living and working in Ururi and Snowdonia, I'm very aware and connected to the natural cycles which affect and inspire my rhythms, creativity and sense of well-being. And the oak woodland that we see in the slides is a special place for me and a perfect place to share in reforming and restoring the derelict loom, airing its material histories and gaining further understanding of past and present connections. And experiencing can be bodily felt rather than thought, known or verbalized. And I recognize this in my own process and that the felt sense can be difficult to find words to express it. And I trust staying with the not knowing and just allowing communication to evolve. And Friedman, that cites Gendlin, states that by staying with the felt sense and finding a symbol that matches it, the felt sense unfolds its meaning and shifts. Before we have explicit words, concepts, or other symbols, we understand the now viscerally through our experiencing of it. And I think metaphor can be explored in many different ways.
Annie Albers describes material as metaphor, as we've been doing for the last few days. And John Berger, who writes a lot about drawing, and I'm sure you've come across in other ways through his narrative, suggests metaphor as a root of all language, deeper than the unconscious.
Mm. Yeah.
So house is a loom, loom is a house. we established a way of working with a material list, and the material list has become a really important element of identifying things of value at the beginning of a collaboration. And even though we've known each other a long time, being able to talk through a set of objects, elements of the building, the conversation, the loom parts. For me, there's metaphor is important, but there's also a lot of slippage. For me, it's about finding the gap between looms and the social engagement, and between systems and objects and the social engagement and the event that's of interest. So sometimes things happen and you're reflecting back. We don't see the materials list as a complete thing. It came and went, and we added to it and took other elements away through the conversation. The draw loom, we used the draw loom and our experience of jacquard and dobby weaving as a way of reflecting on where things sat in one room above the other in relation to ideas of home. If we look at this image, and we can move on as I'm talking, the draw loom has this kind of softness of hands felt, along with this heavy structure above, with the tension and controls, and the weaving area, whereas the derelict loom is open, leaving gaps and places for entanglement with other narratives and stories, which seemed important. In the installation itself, as it hung in the upper space, it was really difficult to find words for what it was. It seemed to belong in that space. And it was a kind of attic space, or more like an archetype or ancient experience of being. Desaiger speaks of drawing as drawing in drawing through the 20th century as a line which is unfolding like a loom. But she also talks about the cat's cradle and remaking the cat's cradle through her work of Celia Vicuna. And John Berger suggests time as not an unfolding of a story, but importantly a spreading out in space. And he talks of the field, the dialogues, and the circular motions.
Do you want to say more about the Neolithic loom? Or?
The Neolithic loom that was in the previous slide, is as a framework, seems to hold a lot of meaning for me in terms of as an idea of thinking about collaboration. And
it's interesting, it's made of local materials and holds the threads and things in the individual threads that are equal in length and grounded by the stones.
So the idea of the frame is really important as starting in I'm really sorry, I'm so finding this quite difficult to talk.
Well, I like the way you've described it, Trish. Because it's the loom, the Neolithic loom spreads out towards the bottom, and
I wanted to make an analogy between thinking about a cloth widening, a story widening and thickening, and the opportunity of looms and changing their systems. Sorry, got myself out of sync.
Well done, yeah.
We'll move on. Yeah, we've done that one.
There you go. Okay. So this one we have this is the earth reaching in and out. We call the image reaching in and out, and a shared conclusion that represents our experience and values, a sense of place and connection. It was important to create a conclusion that was shared and was physically here. The image was enabled by the filmmaking and the decision to select vigorously, which was, we discovered was a big, big job. And we feel it holds layers of experience and meaning for both of us. And this was difficult because there was so much of value in the whole process.
I think it's often the case when we're involved in collaboration that in the discussion and so on, to actually pull out meaning, because the process is what it's all about. But we found it really useful to use the frame of exhibition and very tight boundaries to begin to find something together to speak of.
Well, it was very different. Once lockdown happened, obviously we weren't able to see each other, so we continued to connect with each other online. And there was the huge frustration of intermittent and delayed connection, especially on Anglesey. I was up in the mountains, Trish down by the sea, and particularly the sound and technical problems. And we did the sound once we were actually physically together again. And Trish had all the knowledge and expertise of the making of the film and learning how to do that. When I found the most difficult thing was moving from the tacit to the online, a difficult experience. It was a very unfamiliar way of working, and I have limited skills. But I missed the tactile quality, just having all these wonderful things, our warps and everything. It's a very little warp, this one. And I just missed all that. But with a growing understanding of technology, I embraced the positive attributes, and found new ways of reconnecting with Trish at a distance. And we were experimenting, drawing on glass and winding threads around the computer. And I don't know, there was this wonderful connection started coming, and it made it very creative. And that's how we continued to keep working on the thing. So this is our last slide, yeah. This one. Oop, it's gone. This slide is, again, it's a materials list, isn't it, that we found really
materials
valuable.
list, again, came in walking to a space, sharing conversations and identifying the important elements.
Yes, the things of value, isn't it? I think the things of value with the materials. And we made the walk specifically for this area, for this location. It was part of the Gwylarfon Ogwen festival they have every year. And we made the warp specifically for that location, and it was about 13 meters, and it was just heavy. It was just had this wonderful quality, and connected the trees from the ancient oaks up to the copse. And the people became the weft as they shared their thoughts and values and experiences, which was their local woodland, by writing notes and hanging in between the warp threads. So moving in and out expanded our practice and understanding. And we will leave you with thoughts of the wind blowing. Resettling the warp.
Yeah. One of the things that I found very exciting about the day, it was a very experimental one-day thing, put it up, and engaging with local people, people who are walking dogs, people who are of the village, as well as other creative people. But to see the wind resettling the warp in the space was really, really great.
Yeah.
And really sorry for my nervousness and so on. It's a long time since I've been in front, and I prefer to be at the back talking. So sorry about that.
Well done. You can stay there. You might even stay there. Yeah? Thanks to Trish and Pom and to all of our collaborative panel speakers. I'd like to welcome everybody back onto the stage when we bring some more chairs up for a bit of a Q&A. So if anybody's got any questions, raise your hands for the roving mics.
Sorry. Are you?
Is that me?
Oh.
Is that you? Are you
Yeah.
there?
All right.
Yeah. Don't fall off the end.
Lots of us.
So have we got any questions from the audience? Go on, Alice, yeah? Have we got a mic for Alice? Thank you.
I was really struck by, Amne talking this morning about the kind of sociability and the kind of community and the language and conversations that are promoted through shared making, and how that unfolds and how that kind of promotes joy, conversation, kind of sense of the self. And all of you have talked about that, and you've kind of shown us that in the way that you've described how you work together. And I just wondered if you could just reflect on how the kind of practice and the material itself, you've said, the touch, the tactic, and we've heard about the haptic, but how coming together as an in conversation kind of evolves and kind of develops, I suppose. I don't quite know who to direct that to. Lynn.
I would go around. Yeah. I think when you said joy, I mean, it does, but it also is, I've discovered it's an opportunity for people to share, not nice stories as well, kind of, which means, there's that responsibility. People I've had in workshops will hang around at the end when everybody's gone and tell you, my husband's in hospital, he's had a stroke, I'm dealing with it. So it's it's a vehicle to kind of share. But I think, the materiality, I mean, I'm sure we all are aware of lockdown and making with your hands and kind of connecting, what a huge upsurge of interest there's been in all sorts of craft things, whether it's ceramics or, sort of weaving or knitting. It is something that really connects you to being alive, and I think is a really positive thing. So for me, that's a really crucial thing. And I use it in all different ways, and I see myself as a problem solver, kind of, sort of finding solutions to kind of try and bring people together. But that's, I'll let everybody else say something.
I agree. I think a lot of the content of my projects, when I look back over the years, have involved a degree of loss. And so there's loss, the loss in a really big sense, particularly when thinking about place and where people are actually based. There's the narratives around the loss of industry, for example, and that impact on community, and actually the loss of resources for a lot of the communities I work with, who are very underserved in many ways. So there are narratives of loss that actually run alongside all of it, whether it's in arts and health contexts, or in a heritage project, you see this. And so managing, it's a fine line to tread actually as a practitioner, to kind of be able to give space to stuff that is connecting, but actually can also be very sad. Yeah, I think textiles do hold a space in a different way, and I think hand stitch has a very particular kind of place in that, because I think there's there's a lovely phrase about side-by-sideness, which, you know, that kind of, we're back to the tabletop, working around a space, and the lulls in quiet making can be really kind of powerful, and actually I'd even go as far to say sometimes quite healing environments.
I think the side-by-side is really important, which is why this is quite difficult. But I'm also very aware of the privilege that we have as people and the time that we've had to spend listening this morning. And in my own family, I have quite a mix of cultures who've married into my family, my daughters and grandchildren, and that sense of being close and side by side and sharing through thread and through making has been really important.
I think it's that simplicity of the materials, isn't it, as well? I mean, you know, the simple sketchbook. I mean, this idea of a sketchbook circle comes from a lady called Eleanor Brass started it up for educators to try and shoehorn in some sort of level of making, and we've kind of adopted that process and sending a simple book off to each other that then you draw into, onto, on top of, and then it's obviously evolved into this material exchange. But there are, you know, they're scraps of materials and bits and bobs that we find, and bits of drawings and scrapbook. It's that level of, I like that. I think that's really freeing, and it's very democratic, and
it's accessible too, isn't it? Things that anybody could access as well. But I'm definitely with you in terms of perhaps when you're arriving at I do quite a bit of community work as well. When you're arriving at those community spaces, you don't quite know what's going to come. And I was with a group of primary school children, and they didn't know what a pin and a needle was. So you're really having to start from those sort of basics. So yeah, you don't quite know what you're going to. And I'm with you with the car boot, like an array of things, and you kind of sort of, it's like pulling them out of the bag, isn't it? Ready for what might come, isn't it? Yeah.
Was one of your words, Lynn, I couldn't work out if it was transformation or transportation, or was it both?
Transformation.
Transportation as well. Yeah. But it did get me thinking about the mobility, actually, and a lot of the things that all of us are doing are because of the, you know, the mobility of textile as a material that can be folded up and put away in a pocket, and then it comes out and you had your large scale pieces, and the idea that it can just transpire into all of these spaces, I think, is what makes textiles so, you know, brilliant as a medium in terms of being able to convey all of those things. But yeah, but it also then got me thinking about the idea of the mobility, and you know, you said earlier about this, it's really stuck in my mind about this idea of the homebound, you know, with the network of, you know, women that are literally stuck in those spaces. And I think you're right to say there's a freeing, an entity of privilege where we are at home, you know, because of the nature of families, children, parents, etc. But we've also got a lot of liberty that other people don't have, and it really kind of struck me, actually. It was so poignant, and you know, it makes you feel very just privileged then, I suppose, that we can, you know, do this. But I just want to say one more thing quickly, which was to define the difference, I suppose, between collaboration and group work, because I think, again, there's a little bit of a sort of entanglement there. I mean, I feel very lucky to have found these two people to be working collaboratively with, because I don't think it's that necessarily that something that's that easy to do. I think it is a relationship, it is a conversation, it is work, you know. And I think, you know, we actually only met through screen space during the pandemic in our roles as lecturers or students. And I'm not going to define who or what did what, because I think that's not important. I think what the important thing is that we developed a relationship that we just felt like going forward we could maintain something. We had a kind of sense of connection that was absolutely integral to us as a group of people, and I think, you know, that is just important to point out, that you can't always force collaboration on people. You can do group work, but you can't always force that collaboration.
There's lots of vulnerabilities it can bring out, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially like with these material exchanges that we've been finding, that actually working on top of each other's work, it's very risky and very vulnerable, and you can very easily get it wrong. And it's the conversations and the...
Not fallen out yet, though, have we?
No. No, and normally, you know, that process that we did there, it's terrible to do it in 20 minutes, because that's normally us a morning, and there's lunch, and we fall about laughing about it. And, but there's a lot of this, you can feel that in a lot of these relationships. There is
I think when you're communicating, it was, I found, coming from my therapeutic background, and Trish from academia, it was interesting, our conversations, how we describe things differently or discuss things. And it was this in and out that was going on all the time, wasn't it? This communication. And just how important it was, like you say, it has to be.
Yeah. I think Trish and Pom said it brilliantly when they put on the material list that conversation was a really important material.
Yeah.
Isn't that something we can all reflect on?
Yeah.
Did we have another question on this side?
Hi, thanks so much for all of those. This isn't to anybody in particular, but it's just struck me this morning, and perhaps it's inevitable because we're talking about communication and collaboration, but how performative so much of this work is. I was thinking, you know, this was a little performance over here at the table, and the way, you know, these are performed conversations, and then also, you know, the way that people have turned to film as a way to communicate their work. So I just wondered if any of you sort of think of your work also as in performative terms, or not. It may not be relevant at all. I'm speaking as a theatre scholar, so I have a vested interest, but I'm really intrigued by the performative elements of the work.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I know when we started opening the first sketchbooks and getting together, it was just I mean, it's something that I've done in my work previously. Because of a weaver, there's so much beautiful sound to capture that I tend to often just stick a voice memo on, or even trying to work out what the hell it is I'm trying to say. I might record myself in the car on the way home and, what are you doing? You know, what's this about? So it was literally just a chance thing that I started putting down the phone every time we met, and then we hash it all together. But I really love it not making sense and just pulling out little bits. Also, we talk over each other constantly. So I have to edit out about, you know, 3/4 of it anyway. But it is a material. That conversation and that unwrapping and that, you know, detangling of what it is we're doing is such a crucial part of it. But again, I think that's textiles, isn't it? The material, you know, you had to bring some material here.
Conversation
It's
through
so
cloth,
important to do
through
it.
cloth in that sense also is quite personal. And I think that difficulty of sharing in a larger space.
Yeah.
It was lovely to hear you talking about these closed spaces, smaller spaces where you're engaged and thinking through. Yeah.
Have we got time for one more question? We've got a hand up on this side.
One at the back as well.
Maybe two, depending on how quick this answer is.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, they're all really wonderful. There was just a question I had, because you are describing the loss of this sort of elephant, yeah, this small piece, and that there is a sort of tension between the sort of preciousness of the object and your collaborative practice. So what you're doing is actually you're transgressing those sort of boundaries. And just whether anybody would like to say anything more about that sense of that personal preciousness, that object that you may have made, and how you can both own and collaborate.
I think it's a process that we are constantly looking at, because I mean we've been doing this about a year now, but we constantly sort of reevaluating how we address that, because it is a process of you letting go of what you've created to give to somebody else. And I know there's been moments when a couple of you said to me, I'm so nervous about touching something that you've created and ruining that. Or,
equally,
you know,
there's just the pieces that I did for Sian this time. I've got really attached to them. I didn't really want to give them away, and I would like them back. It's difficult.
So ownership, I think, is
But actually, I think to kind of come back to the idea of the performativity and your question there, I think there's something in relation to the making of the event and the gifting of something, and that's actually ephemeral, or it's something that's maybe captured in ways beyond the physical textile itself. Hence why we're using film processes or other forms of kind of documentation to somehow capture it, but at the same time kind of let it go, because obviously in the event, once it's gone, it's gone.
But there was also the lost elephant. That was.
Actually, with regards to the lost elephant, I think one of the things about long community projects, which tend to have, you know, they have these kind of pauses where you might exhibit what you've been doing as a group, you know, so sometimes those things are really performative, they're kind of installations, or they're, or exhibited things. And but actually the thing that has really struck me, and it's happened on multiple occasions, is that the people in the groups at that point will say, they'll say to people who come to see it, they'll say, but this isn't really what we've done. We made things, but it was the groups that were the thing.
Yeah.
It's the process, it's the journey there, it's the getting there that is the work, in my opinion. And yes, having outcomes that are kind of exhibitable, and yes, that's really lovely. But actually, the work is those bits of space around the table and people coming together. That's the work.
Agree.
Yeah, it's what you share and
it
exchange.
It goes back to something that I said this morning about craft or creativity being a group asset, not an individual gain. It's something that we do.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I mean, it's another huge subject, but, you know, the idea of, and there's an awful lot written about co-production and co-creation, and some of it I think, I don't think that's co-creation at all, you know. And you know, I mean, I'm constantly interrogating my role alongside or within these types of groups and projects. But yeah, the work's in those spaces. Yeah.
Is that something that you find often, Lynn, with
working
independently and as an academic?
Huge subject here. Yeah, one of the things I'd written on my hand alongside all those other T's was transgressions, because Grant Kester, who's an art historian, American art historian in these collaborative projects, talks about what transgressions matter. It's a huge kind of worms. We won't go there, but, you know, I think as somebody who works in that field, you have to be mindful, you have to have empathy, you have to kind of respect, you know, ethical awareness. There's so many things. So it's a huge topic, but I think hopefully we're still learning. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Can we give everybody a round of applause again? Yeah. Thank you. Let's take some of these chairs.
Well, I'll introduce you all. I'm just wondering if Lucy, are you still here? Is Lucy here? Is she brave enough to come? I'm introducing it though. Well, it's kind of hard to summarize all of this. So I'm just going to ask everyone for just a kind of reflection, just something, a memory from the last couple of days. So first of all, I better introduce you all, hadn't I?
Kate. Well, we met Kate yesterday because she was introducing Growing House, and she has been, you know, I think there are many students and past students here who've been taught on the embroidery or textile in practice course, and many of the students are downstairs watching this on live stream. So she's been instrumental in, oh, there's Lucy. Lucy, do you want to come and join us? Sorry about that. I think we need a student's voice up here, if you don't mind, Lucy, but I'm not going to put you too much on the spot. So, of course, Kate and her colleagues have been very involved in the curation of the conference, and there are ripples beyond this room. And Growing House, we're going down to see it later. So Lucy's one of our students, so she very kindly stood up this morning, and they've been writing and summarising, and Lucy is level 6, so she's about to write her dissertation. So all I'm going to do is ask you for a little memory. So just think about that while I'm introducing the others, you know, of the last couple of days. Jenny, I introduced you yesterday. So Jenny is the Director, Chief Creative Executive or something, anyway, of British Textile Biennial. And of course, you know, we are so proud to be alongside you, an absolutely extraordinary programme, and thank you for the panel yesterday. And of course, many of you are going on to view the exhibitions, which are all around Lancashire, in effect. And you said to me as you arrived yesterday, in a way, it's great to be in one location because you move between spaces, and that's and that's, you're nomadic. But actually, that's what is really interesting about the biennial and the work that you do, which is within the community. It arises from the people and the ground, and in a way, you know, a lot of what you've been talking about, Amne, is about how you're drawing together community. So I've already introduced Amne this morning, so you know her. And then Gemma, who you've met through her, you know, introducing sessions. So Gemma has been absolutely instrumental in shaping and putting together this conference. So it felt very important to include her. Her kind of sense of the last couple of days, her reflections on it. I'm just going to introduce this by saying a little quote by Annie Albers, who we all know is the kind of archetypal, pioneering, seminal weaver. And she said we need to listen to each other and listen to material to kind of have a creative imagining, being creative, and not so much the desire to do something as the listening to that which wants to be done. And we see that through materials. And I just thought, actually, she knows how to kind of sum everything up. And I'm really aware, hearing of all of the presentations, that we are talking about textiles. We're talking about people. We're talking about all those kind of embedded narratives. But we meet those through textiles. It travels, it's in movement, it travels with us, acts as message carriers, cultural envoys, creates roots and traces, and it connects us with each other. So we've heard so much about all those kind of big themes. In a way, I'd like to have time to talk all afternoon, because I think we could unpack a lot of that, but you can probably hear a little bit of a buzz outside. So all I'm going to do is just sort of say and we had Jeff yesterday anyway, you know, summarising, and I think a lot of that is it's echoing in our ears. But I also want to invite you all, you know, to send us emails, tell us what your thoughts are, you know, and this is about this ongoing conversation. But perhaps in the meantime, I could just sort of turn to each of you to say, just give us a little bit of a memory or a recall of something that's stuck in your mind. Do you want to start, Lucy? Are you happy to do that?
That's fine. So it's been really good sort of journalistic practice for me, and sort of like typing everything up. I think I spoke to Alice this morning about Sam Meach's fabrications. I think that really stood out to me, as my grandpa actually owned Chatham Mill, which is just down the road. I think it's in the process of being sold, but him talking sort of about the displacement of workers from those mills was really interesting.
Do you want to say a little bit more about that? You know, how that's been really... Oh, no, don't worry. Okay, don't worry. But, well, I'll echo about what the conversation had, the complexity about how that actually is about history, a kind of really, substantial history that actually is really difficult and complicated to negotiate in the present. So the building kind of embodies that, and but you've got your own family history in that. And maybe that's a little bit of the reason why you decided to come and do textiles. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, don't say any more. It's fine. That was really useful.
Oh, thank you very much, Lucy. I know it's very nerve-wracking for students to be up here on the stage. I'd like to thank the students from Textiles in Practice. There's some of you at the back there and people watching online. They've been instrumental behind the scenes in helping us, so thank you. I think the insights that I'd like to reflect on are the difference. Yesterday we had a very different day to today. Today's been about community and about people and about displacement. And Amne's presentation was very heartwarming, but not heartwarming, if you can say that. And I think it just, the last panel talked about freeing and being free. And I think that's so hard-hitting when we have the freedom. You know, we are privileged here at the art school. We come in, we teach. We're all here as textile practitioners or people connected to textiles, and we can have a voice. And I think Amne's presentation really hits home that some people don't have a voice and they are homebound. I also think that textiles itself as a medium, as a thing, is moving forward really interestingly with technology. So yesterday's talks were kind of showing the progression of where that's going. But I think ultimately it's about process, and it's about innovation, and it's about people. And I think somebody in the last panel said it's not about the stuff. I think it was Claire Wellesley Smith. It's not about stuff, because it isn't. It's about the process and the action and the connecting, and that's how textile kind of moves itself forward. Okay, that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you, that's great. Thank you, Kate.
Oh, just so much. I mean, I think overall, coming to a conference like this, and it reinforces why we are partners and why we do what we do at the British Textile Biennial. And just I think my main reflection is about the gentle and the soft power of textiles and that's about women, and that's about, and like you said, you know, we kind of resist that, but actually there's power in that as well. And I think, you know, just that last panel particularly reinforced that for me, the gentle storytelling and the quiet, soft power that resides in the objects and in the making of the objects, and how much textiles hold those stories. And there's a complexity, but there's a simplicity in that as well. And, you know, the power that is held in these objects to make change and to really make social change, to connect people, to drive the story of this world forward, that's really, really powerful, I think. And that's come across in all of the sessions over the last couple of days. What also, it leaves me with a lot of hope, because, you know, I run a biennial, so I need to know that there's more work, there's more stories to tell, and I know that's why we know that the British Textile Biennial is going to go on, because there's so much in textiles for us to still communicate to the world through and about. So yeah, I just want to say thank you for everybody coming and sharing. And being part of this wonderful conference. And for me to take a couple of days to just sit and listen and hear is a real privilege, because normally I'm behind a spreadsheet trying to work out how we pay for it all and make things happen. So to come and actually sit and listen and hear of all these wonderful people who are making and sharing and connecting through textiles is just wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. Well, I know that we're already thinking about the 2 years' time, aren't we?
So for me, it's always, this is not the kind of space I'm usually in, so it's always intimidating. And I think to be at the tail end of it, the first thought is, oh my God, I'm still alive. And I didn't make an ass of myself, I hope. But in terms of what to take away, there was so much. I mean, I feel like I'm jet lagged, so I couldn't sleep, but that also meant I kept running through so many of the ideas and concepts that were introduced yesterday. But if I had to choose two things, I think for me, the first was connection, kind of looking at, all these different ways of approaching making and craft and what it means to people. And the meaning is quite distinct, I think, and how people figure out what part of it is important and what part of it deserves to be told and to get the lens. It's so different, but I thought what was interesting is this constant sense of the act having meaning, the act in itself, the process, if you will. And I think that I felt like was something that connected us across culture, across time, across place, across geography, and it gave me a lot of hope because quite often the context in which I work with making can be bleak, although, as I said, also a source of joy and power. And so it's good to know that even if that's our experience, there can be another experience through the same kind of process, if you will. And the other thing, and I think this is kind of more academic, and because I don't spend time in academic spaces, I love kind of geeking out about this. So this is going to be me thinking about, this is what I'm going to be thinking a lot about, is these dichotomies. So the dichotomy I came in thinking about, or the polarities or tensions that we hold, are between rural and urban and white and brown, and all of those kind of dichotomies. But the dichotomies I'm leaving with are the ones between art and craft, and I'm going to be spending a lot of time thinking and reading about that. So thank you very much. It's been a real honor to be here.
Thank you very much, Amne. Well, I think this is an ongoing conversation, and those pieces of work, it's a real privilege to see those, and I think we're going to have a conversation about where those are going next. And should I be buying a Chloe handbag or not?
I think there's better ways of helping the artisans.
Great. Okay.
Although I'm grateful for Chloe, just to be clear.
Oh gosh. So I think, as Jenny was just saying, the past couple of days I've been the one mostly running around and checking we're on time, and but having been so heavily involved in bringing everyone together, I've got to know everyone before you came here yesterday, and that's been a real privilege. And I think the quote you said about Annie Albus and listening was kind of, we sat down last year to plan this conference. We were trying to make it an enjoyable conference. It was bringing a community together, enabling conversations, and enabling that listening to other people. And it's been really lovely to have everybody here, and hopefully you've got that sense that everyone's been listening to each other, and you've had lots of additional conversations outside of the panels, but hopefully you'll all agree that they were also really fruitful. And I think on a big level, that listening comes through because of this lady here, and she's going to shout at me for gushing, but she's going to be not officially stepping back, but you're taking, focusing more on her own work, because she's a very in-demand lady. But anyone will know who's worked with this wonderful woman, that she's super generous and allows those voices to come through. And in organising today and yesterday, that's been enabling some of us to come through, to shape how the conversations might go. And I've been, you know how much I love you. But I just wanted, and I really hope Laurie doesn't mind me sharing this, but there was a short email exchange last night that Christine Chitinska had to leave early, and just sent a thank you email. And then there was a lovely exchange between Alice and Christine talking about how wonderful they both are, which they are. And Laurie just replied with a sentence that I think really summed them both up, and Alice especially. She said, "Thank you so much to the two of you, such generous and gracious individuals, holding power in a very different way to most conferences." And reading that late last night, I was quite tearful.
Well, I can't stand up here just on my own, so this is all about you. And I just think that's what Textiles does. It's a community of generous individuals, but it's a community that comes from the back, from the margins, from the edges. And we talked about edges and borders, and actually we can kind of, there was Elaine talking about how those edges are boundaries which can be reconceptualized, and I mentioned that this morning. So here we are all together to kind of cross-connect, to kind of cross borders, cross boundaries, and work together. And together we are more than the sum of our parts. So, and I think that's what's evident today. So that's kind of a very good metaphor for a cloth, isn't it? Yeah. So we are committed to each other, and I am reducing my time here at MMU, but I'm not going away completely. So you haven't got rid of me yet. Thank you all. It has been such a privilege, and I really know that some of you have travelled quite a considerable way to come here, but I think these conversations will extend outside of this space, so keep in touch with us. We want your ideas, we want to have this kind of channel of communication to make things happen and to connect opportunities between us. We are trying to make more things happen collectively, which draws in, the richness of the activities, but also it's very hard-hitting. We've had some really kind of, we can change the world. That's our plan, isn't it? So, for the better. We're not doing a special issue this year. We may well do again, but it's really important to locate this within the academic frame. We recognise the importance of that. So we're not doing it this year, but nevertheless, there will be opportunities to think how these conversations go forward with a critical lens. We want you to carry on talking. We want you to carry on making and accessing these. There's this workshop two workshops downstairs. Please go down there and keep in touch with us. You've got to navigate your way through all of these leaders, Elia leaders, who you can hear outside. But would you mind just, swooping straight through, going down and reconvening downstairs? I'm involved in Elia, so sadly, I won't be able to join you in that conversation, which I'm really regretful about. But please, email me, get in touch with Gemma. It's an open door. And we will welcome you back here anytime, even though I'm not going to be here as much. I'm still here. So please continue that conversation. Thank you all. Thank you to the students who've been brilliant. Thank you to the speakers. I know how hard it is. It's really hard. But you were all brilliant. And we wanted the variety of tones. And I think that was really powerful. And thank you all to the attendees who've travelled and all of the support that we've had in this. So, it's been, and thank you to the BTB. Go and see the exhibition. So.